I'd like to call the meeting to order, if we can, please. I'd like to welcome everybody back to the 2018 rate-supported budget launch today, and I want to welcome and thank all my budget committee members for showing up on a Friday afternoon. Again, calling the meeting to order, we'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting today on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and home to many diverse Indigenous people. And again, welcome everybody. This is the 35th meeting of the Budget Committee. It's a special meeting of the Budget Committee, which is a launch of the 2018 rate-supported budget. If you can watch us on YouTube at Toronto City Hall or Toronto City Council Live, or on your computer, tablet, or smartphone, toronto.ca/council. Today we'll be we'll have presentations from the three rate base, the water, solid waste, and Toronto Parking Authority. We do have to be finished just with the sundown clause 4 p.m. today. And so what will happen, we'll have, again, the overall presentation, and then there will be an opportunity to question the presentation. Next week, next Friday, I believe we have a full day of public deputations, and we'll be getting into, I guess, more of the meat of the budget next week. But today is just to ask questions on the presentation. So are there any declarations of conflict under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, I'm going to pass it over to Josie Levita, who's going to begin with a brief presentation, and then we'll get into the three divisions.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members of committee. I'm just going to take a moment to go through a couple of slides just to set context for us today as we begin in earnest the 2018 budget process. So as you know, in addition to our tax-supported budget, we also have three fee-supported budgets: Toronto Water, Solid Waste Management Services, and the Toronto Parking Authority. The launch of this part of the process is today, November 3rd, and we'll be coming back to you with the tax-supported budget on November 30th. So just to set the context, our total budget, this is the 17 budget, is $12.3 billion. And these three particular program areas make up 14% of that total budget. So that's the portion that you are considering as we begin this part of the process. Similarly, on the capital side, our 10-year capital plan in 2017 was almost $40 billion. And this group of program areas actually represent about 1/3 or 33%. So fairly significant investments that you'll be considering in this time frame. So just at the highest level, you have Toronto Water coming first to you today. What is being recommended here overall on the rate side is a 5% increase as planned and endorsed by Council. In previous years, if you recall, we had a 9-for-9 program, and then Council gave direction to plan for 2 8% increases, 2 5% increases, and then 3% after that. So we are in that 5% phase. And this budget, of course, addresses our operating service delivery as well as dealing with aging infrastructure and our wet weather flow and basement flooding programs. For solid waste management, what you will hear today is a recommended rate increase, which is a blended rate of 1.9%. These budgets ensure continued service delivery of our waste management services and also helps us to advance our waste diversion goals. And finally, the Toronto Parking Authority. This budget has both an operating and capital component as well, servicing on our on-street, off-street, and bike share programs and ensuring renewal as well as service improvement and growth issues. So just quickly on the schedule, we're here today to launch. You're hearing presentations. It's questions and answers on those presentations. We'll be back on November 10th for more in-depth budget briefings. You'll have had access to the budget notes, and you will hear from the public on these three program areas. We wrap up on the 27th with final recommendations from this committee that will then be advanced to Executive Committee on November 29th, and then to Council for its meeting of December 6th and 7th. Thank you.
Thank you, Josie. I don't know, there's probably no questions on that, so why don't we just go right over to, Councillor Carroll.
Okay, before we even start the budget process for the year, I went over and checked to make sure it wasn't just my age showing. Yes, it's true that on the Toronto's website, our budget page, there's a slide in the rolling slides. But for the average person who opens it, if it's not on that slide, when you open it, you start searching it. And when you search City Budget 2018, it doesn't take you there. I need that resolved early in the process, or I'll just say it at the beginning of every meeting. City Budget 2018, Budget 2018, Budget City 2018, whatever you search, it ought to take you to the page if the slide's not there when you open the website. And we're, once again, starting the year, that's not the case. It takes you to some key dates page, not the budget page, and that is our key communication vehicle. Thank you.
Yeah, there are no binders this year for the budget process. You will have to manage the budgets through your own individual office if you want them printed up. It's all online. Everything's online. You'll be able to access everything online. And we will work at, thank you, Councillor Carroll, we'll work at trying to get that fixed ASAP. Thank you. So we'll pass it over to Lou DiGeronimo, General Manager of Water, to go through his budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll walk you through the 2018 Toronto Water Budget presentation. And what I'll do is I'm going to highlight a few slides. I'm not going to dwell on them. It's a lengthy presentation that's meant for you to read and ask questions off of it, but I'll point out some key components of this year's budget presentation. Just at a glance, just to remind everyone to give context, we provide drinking water to 3.6 million people. That includes the wholesale delivery to residents in York Region as well. We have over $28 billion of infrastructure that we manage, and we operate most of our facilities 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. The replacement value, as I mentioned, is over $28 billion, and it's split between the three program areas as you see on this slide. The business plan, or the strategic plan that Toronto Water puts together, is in line with the strategic actions that have been in place since 2013, as put forward by the city manager, and we fulfill quite a number of those actions as we complete our strategic plan. And our strategic plan has been in place since 2010, and has 5 guiding principles, and some of those principles I'll be touching on throughout the presentation. The program map for Toronto Water, there's the 3 key programs that you're all familiar with. It's the water treatment and supply, it's wastewater collection and treatment, and it's stormwater management. The organizational structure, here's a chart for you to look at. We have 6 directors that report up to me, and we have a total of over 1,700 staff that's budgeted for in the division. Some of the key program challenges, and the program challenges is the entire 3 programs, operating and capital. The one big challenge that we had faced, and we made a lot of progress on tackling, is putting in place a long-term financial strategy. And this year's budget is actually presenting the last of a multi-year financing strategy. And I'll give you some updates in the slides on that program. We've also had to manage declining water consumption. I brought that forward in the past, and it continues to be a trend. I'll be talking about that in some slides and showing you that on a per capita basis, we've been seeing continued decline in water consumption. Aging infrastructure remains our priority. Good news is we've been slowly reducing the backlog. We still have a ways to go. It's still sitting at about $1.4 billion in backlog. Basement flooding is a new program, a challenging program to get ramped up because it's covering many parts of the city, and I'll be talking about that. We are strictly regulated, that you know, and a key component of managing a pay-as-you-go model, because in Toronto Water there is no debt. We need to make sure that we maintain a reserve balance. Otherwise, we would have to take on debt in order to run our programs. If we take a look at past performance going back the last 15 years, that financing strategy that we put in place in 2006, it was entirely focused on growing our capital program, and in particular the State of Good repair program. As you can see from this slide, it has achieved that. We now spend the bulk of the money that we generate every year on capital. as was designed. If we get into the operating budget, some of the key challenges we face in Toronto Water deal with our first objective, and that's trying to maintain stable operating costs. If we're going to raise rates, we want to use the majority of that rate increase to fund the capital program. So we're trying to keep our operating costs low so we don't use that rate increase to fund operating costs. We do that by continually looking for savings from internal resources as well as from external resources, because Toronto Water does buy a lot of services. So managing consumption of electricity and chemicals is key to our process. And that's something that I'll talk about in the slides, is what we've been able to accomplish. Managing the assets is also very critical for us because the asset base is so large, and that requires us to have solid asset management plans in place. And as well, we provide service every day. So how do we improve customer service yet maintain stable operating costs? And that's where we look at efficiencies and technologies to help us achieve that. If we look at some of the key service accomplishments in 2017, we've maintained compliance at all our facilities. That's one of our key priorities in water and wastewater. We also won an award this year, fourth time in the last 10 years, that Toronto Water's water has been judged the best tasting in Ontario. So we won that again in 2017. I'll talk about the improved customer service and technology improvements, those two bullets, a little bit more in the next slide, so I won't dwell on them here. But basement flooding is a program that we continually are trying to ramp up, and I want to highlight in our capital slide some of the projects that we have underway there. If we look at the initiatives that we kicked off in 2017 to manage our operating costs, one of the big things we've done is early in January, we restructured several of our units to create a new customer care unit within Toronto Water. And this will take us a couple of years to fully implement. But the objective of that is to improve the handling of customer service calls and centralize it into one area. We announced that in the 2017 budget year, and it did generate some efficiency savings for us by combining some entities, and we're now into the implementation stage. So in 2017, we completed the restructuring of the manager positions. We are now going through the supervisory positions, and we've sat down already preliminary stages with the unions talking about the reclassification of some positions in future as we try to achieve a better customer service alignment within Toronto Water. The other things we're doing from a transformation point of view is we're launching a geometric network to have our staff in the field more fully plugged into all of our technologies. Right now, staff, some of them are still using older paper technologies, and we want to go to mobile platforms. To do that, we need to improve our network capabilities out in the field. We are also implementing this year, we signed a contract for a new work management system. And this will be shared with solid waste, with Parks, Forestry, Recreation, and Transportation Services. So the four big divisions will be implementing a common platform for work management. That contract got signed this year, and we begin the implementation of it. In addition to that, we are modernizing our space in Metro Hall, trying to densify. All our staff in Metro Hall just moved out, and they're in a satellite location as our facilities team rebuilds that floor. If we take a look at the 2017 year end, so we've got now our revenue data going through this cool and wet spring and summer that we had. So that has hurt our revenue projection. Unlike last year where it was hot, where we had a significant increase in revenue because there was a lot more water being used, this year we had the opposite effect. So we're forecasting that we will be short on revenue, just shy of $12 million below our target. On the good news side, our expenditures are below target as well, and so we're projecting a year-end surplus of $2.3 million. If we look at vacancy rate, our vacancy rate right now, if you look at end of October, is showing the same as last year. But the trend that typically happens is we continue with our hirings. So we project that by year end, that vacancy rate will be low, will go below the 8%, which is better than last year's closeout. We've completed the year to date over 440 hirings, and we only had about 230 exits, so we've made some progress on our vacancy this year. The rate increase, as we've announced, is recommended to be 5% on the water rate. If that's approved, that will generate total revenue for 2018 year of $1.289 billion. And that money will essentially be allocated primarily to our capital programs. As I mentioned earlier, that is the objective. 65% of that revenue will go into capital contributions. When we started this program back in 2006, we had about 40% only going to capital, 60% going to operating. So within that time period, we've completely reversed that trend. The bulk of the money goes to capital. If we look at the funding sources, the bulk of it comes from the sale of water, the water that goes through the meter and what we charge people. We do get other revenues from fees and charges and from selling wholesale to York Region, as well as some from other capital recoveries. If we just take now the breakdown, sorry, did we go the right way? Yes, here we go. If we go to the operating slide, if we take just the operating component that I was discussing, what we're forecasting to spend in the 2018 budget is $446 million to operate the facilities. That then leaves us all the rest of that money, over $830 million to go to capital contribution. If you look at the breakdown of that, on the salary side, 40% of our operating expenditures are salary, and the rest are made up of procuring all kinds of other services. If we take a look at the high-level summary of the 2018 base budget, I'll walk you through key line items. So the objective this year was to have essentially a zero, if not better, as compared to last year's budget. And this year we were able to bring forward a net decrease in the overall budget, so a 0.5 percentage point decrease as compared to last year, and that was achieved by offsetting some pressures that we had, about $9.9 million starting pressure. We did that by finding $7.3 million in expenditure reductions and additional $4.4 million in revenue changes. In addition to that, this budget does have an increase in FTEs. There's 9 full-time equivalents being requested, and they are broken down as one being identified last year, tied to new capital coming online at our Humber plant, 3 of them being tied to capital programs, one specifically a Toronto Water capital program, and that is, as I mentioned earlier, the implementation of the enterprise work management system. We need a systems integrator now that we have a contract in place to start that system. 2 of them are being requested to coordinate with the TTC for the Scarborough Subway project. So we've been asked to provide additional resources to support that program. And then the other 5 have been identified to help support our reviews of groundwater applications to keep the development process moving along. We do have a team there, but there's a backlog in processing the applications, and this will be fully funded from revenues we generate from private water agreements. So there is no net impact to our budget. If we look at the breakdown of the operating budget by the 3 program areas, water treatment and supply actually goes down on expenditures, while wastewater and stormwater go up. And that gives us that overall net expenditure of slightly above year over year, offset by the revenue increases, giving us that total net reduction in our budget of the greater than 0.5%. Here's a slide that shows you the breakdown of the starting pressures, 9.9 million, a variety of different pressures that we faced. Here are the cost reductions that we identified, over $7 million, and then the additional revenues. And this is how we were able to offset or meet the objective of coming in at 0 or below. We do have one new and enhanced service request. We're not showing it as an FTE on our budget because that FTE is actually in the strategic communication budget. But we will be funding it. We're asking for an additional senior communications coordinator as we need to build our digital communication strategy. We're working on that now. Our customers are more and more using social media and digital media to communicate with us, and we need to put in place not only the strategy, but the resource to help us manage that. So this is an anticipation of growing our customer service and our customer care center. If we look outwards at 2019 and 2020, there's a number of different pressures, the usual pressures. The only one that I'd highlight here as a concern for us and we need to track is increases in electricity costs. We are subject to what the province does with electricity pricing, because electricity is one of the largest commodities that we buy. We spend over $60 million a year in electricity. So if they see big jumps provincially of 8% and 8.5% as it's being discussed, it will impact our budget, and we're going to have to manage that pressure in 2019 and 2020. I'll take you now through the capital budget. Capital budget challenges. Key one that I want to highlight on this slide, it's emerging right now, is planning for growth. Growth is now starting to put pressure on components of our existing rate. This year, for example, in order to fund some of the growth programs that we have over the 10 years, we will have to take about $200 million out of the regular reserve, because development charges are not generating enough revenue over the 10-year period to cover wastewater and stormwater projects. We essentially will deplete them, and I have a slide I'll show you on that. With respect to, on the capital side, some of the key accomplishments, I won't get into specific projects, you can see them there, but right now the program is evenly distributed between water treatment and supply, water treatment and collection, and stormwater, which is a growing program, and you'll see that grow over time. Our capital spending year over year, we started the year actually at a great pace, but it did slow down a bit, and we've had some issues getting some tenders out on the street and some contracts awarded. So good news is we are ahead of last year's spend rate, which is good news, but the pace of growth it has declined a bit. So we're projecting to close out the year end just slightly below 80% if that trend continues. We do see a spike in booking expenditures in that last month in December, so there is a chance that we can come in higher than 80%, but this is our best forecast right now. And here's a chart showing you our budgeted versus actual spend rates over the last number of years. The 2018 capital budget that's being requested for approval has a total gross value of $964 million, so just shy of $1 billion. The bulk of that money is going towards our underground infrastructure and some major key upgrades in our plants and facilities. Facilities include pumping stations and reservoirs throughout the system. If we look at the category by funding source, the bulk of the funding is coming from the capital reserve. It's dealing with our state of good repair or health and safety and legislated issues. We do have some funding from development charges, but it's only 5% forecasted for 2018. And then York Region is also contributing some money. The breakdown on the category, as you can see for 2018, 61% of it goes towards our state of good repair program, and that's to deal with the backlog. Here's a slide just showing you a comparison of our capital plan year over year, what we showed you last year, what we're showing you this year, what changes we made, and what happens then to the reserve. And that's the two lines there. So we have to keep that reserve from going below zero, and that's why you see it bottom out in 2024, 2025. Our capital plan by category, again, over 10 years now, you can see the bulk of the money remains in state of good repair programs, but one of the key things you see is a growth in the service improvement. And that includes basement flooding and wet weather flow projects. Our capital plan by asset class, you can look at that and see the breakdown. Stormwater grows considerably during those 10 years. The overview then for the 10-year plan, the program now, if the plan is approved, is $12.8 billion over 10 years. with the bulk of it slowly switching over to wastewater treatment and collection, as you can see. If we continue with our capital plan, we will eliminate the backlog by about 2024, 2025. So good news is we've been chipping away at it. It's slowly been decreasing since 2009. And with the large jump we see in funding in these years, we will see a big drop in our state of good repair backlog. Now I'll talk about the growth-related projects very quickly. Here are the programs that are in place right now that are tied to the growth-related projects that we've identified. And they're water mains, they're sewers, they're pumping station upgrades, and they're, as well as some environmental assessments that are underway that are identifying future needs. When we look at programming those projects, in addition to ones that we suspect in that 10-year are going to need to be planned, our forecast shows that the wastewater reserve and the stormwater reserves essentially go into negative positions. On the water side, we remain positive. So all of this information is being fed into the development charge review process, and we will be bringing forward a separate report talking about what we need to do with development charges later on. But just this is highlighting some of the pressures that we're seeing in the city of trying to manage growth with existing programs. Here's a summary of our major projects in 2017. I won't dwell on those. I do want to focus on these. These are some of the projects that will be awarded, and construction will be starting very soon in 2018. If we take a look at these set of projects alone, and this is only a handful of projects when we have several hundred in Toronto Water every year, those contracts alone equate to $1.6 billion of commitments. Some very, very large projects starting, ones that have been planned for many years. As you can see, a picture up here, this graphic shows the new outfall that we're building out of Ashbridges Bay, 3 kilometers out into the lake. That will be awarded later on in 2018. As well, out for tender right now is the first phase construction of the Dawn Tunnel project. We also have new pumping stations to build. So very, very large projects that will update Budget Committee as we make progress on those projects. There are some unknown issues, though, that remain. The development charges is one of them that I talked about. The other one that remains a big unknown is the unfunded TRCA capital needs. We have now obtained a list from them that show over $400 million of unfunded needs from TRCA. And we have been unable to go through some of the big items in there. For example, since we had that very wet spring with the high lake levels, there's been a lot of erosion that happened. TRCA has just identified roughly $100 million might be needed to do some shoreline rehabilitation over 10 years. We do not have project-specific information, so we're still discussing with them what that means. And we need to sit down and talk about which ones are water-related, which ones are property-related, because this will impact both property tax budgets as well as the water budget. The other issue that's a large one is the identification of the EEA for the Scarborough Waterfront Trail. It's $170 million. Last year was budgeted at $51 million. We are going through the details of that EA now. We see $170 million, but in addition to that, there's references to other monies that need to be budgeted. Another $22 million for a long-term erosion plan on top of the 170. So we're still trying to understand exactly all the numbers, and we're not ready yet to start saying to council that these projects are ready to go. There's more work required for us to analyze the environmental assessment and those cost impacts. The incremental operating impact of capital, here's a breakdown of what's coming down the line of new capital as it comes online within the plants. We're just giving you forecasts. We always try to mitigate those every budget year, see if we can absorb some of these, but at the same time, it's incumbent on us to identify that there's pressures coming. Service levels, this information is data that's published, and so I'm not going to dwell on these. You can look at them, and if you have questions, now or even the subsequent budget committees, please ask them and I'll answer them for you. Here's our service standards that we publish through 311 and make available online. And so now I get into the recommended water rate. So the water rate for this year, we always have to look at consumption, as I mentioned. So because last year was an anomaly year for us, we had record revenues because it was very warm, first time in a long time. We had to discount that number. So we ignored the 2016 year and we went back to look at the 2015 year, and we forecasted the drop in consumption off of the 2015 year and our forecast for 2017. So by doing that, we are recommending that consumption should be targeted at 1.5% below the 2015 actual, and that's the amount of water that will be consumed. And then go forward each year after that, further 0.5 percentage point drop. And so that's just to have a conservative estimate as we forecast future revenues. Our expenditure rates, as identified, 82% for 2017 and 85% going forward. The rate increase, this is the last year of the planned program. It's a 5% that we're recommending. Subsequent to that, we've plugged in 3% as being on a nominal rate, but then council could look at inflationary or 3%, but it can also look at other issues that I'll identify at election years, but it has the opportunity to discuss that fluctuating rates now. If we look at population and water consumption, we continue to grow as a population. We're 2.8 million within the city proper, but as you can see, total per capita consumption continues to drop, except for the 1 year where 2016 there was a big blip. If we take a look at this year, particularly because it was so cold and wet in the spring and summer, that is a record low for June. That's what this slide is showing you. This is the lowest consumption we've had ever at this size of a population. So as you can see, this is a sustained consumption drop in our city. If we look at the rate, how do we compare residentially? We're still in the lower band of municipalities, and now our rate increases will start to stabilize. On the large industrial side, we still remain competitive as well. If we look at the impact of rate increases to the homeowners, what we do here is we plot what a homeowner would pay if they did not have that decreased consumption, because they have modified their consumption. And so the actual impact of rate increases, here's the declining consumption. They've been able to mitigate some of the rate increases by offsetting consumption. The 2018 5% increase then would equate to the average residential homeowner who now consumes about 260 cubic meters a year. Total cost in 2017 would be $942. That would increase by $47 to $989. That equates to, in 2018, $2.71 per day for your family for operating and capital costs, and that's for drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater. So we still think that that's great value for what you're getting. So projected water rate increase then over the 10 years for our financial planning purposes, as I identified earlier, it's 5%. In election year, in the past, councils have considered making the 3% an annualized 3%. That means at budget time, which happens then in February and March, you could consider a 3.6% increase or a 3%, entirely up to council to make that determination. And that is the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Lou. We'll go to questions. We'll begin, I guess, Councillor DiCiano had questions first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lou, thank you very much for that presentation. Lots of information in there. I want to focus on, I guess, the biggest train wreck that's coming down the road, and that is basically our inability in the future to fund growth-related infrastructure on the Toronto water side. So you're essentially saying, if we look at slide 42, that taxpayers, young families, children, they will be subsidizing the development community for their growth-related needs to the tune of $357 million over 10 years.
So we've not programmed that. What we're showing you is a forecast that if you leave the development charge rate as is, and our best guess of projects that need to be constructed, then you would end up with these deficit positions over time.
Right.
Right now, there's two issues. One, we cannot fully recover the full cost by law of some of our growth-related projects. Ratepayers do have to absorb some components of that. Some projects are 100%, and so we try to maximize those. But based on the present funding rates and the projects that we've got in our plan now and that we anticipate will come in the 10-year budget plan, we will be in negative positions in two of the key reserves.
So I'll just ask my question again. If we all anticipate the growth is coming the way it's
Will
coming.
it be, so that'll be entirely up to council to decide whether it wants to proceed with those projects. But if the answer is
Yes, we
we
need
have
to.
to proceed, it would then be funded out of the capital reserve.
Yeah.
As I indicated, right now, in order to keep our program balanced and identify that those projects proceed, we have already identified in the capital plan about $200 million worth of monies coming out of the regular reserve to fund some growth-related project. So that's in the plan now. Our objective is to try to reintroduce that into the development charge discussion that's going to happen and shift that back out.
So let's be clear. This is just on water. We're going to be short $200-300 million over the next 10 years, where taxpayers are on the hook for a very profitable development industry to attain the infrastructure they need to build their buildings. This is what this document is saying. So now, so thank you for that. So can I now go to our finance staff? The Liberal government in the last few years, they did review the development charges bylaw. Is that correct?
Yes, that is in fact correct. The review took place about a year or so ago.
And we spoke loud and clearly to the province on the challenges that a development charges bylaw has that really doesn't speak to the needs of infill sites that Toronto faces versus what greenfield sites face in the GTA?
So the Development Charges Act was enacted about 20 years ago, and it was largely intended to service greenfield types of developments. It wasn't really well-suited for urban types of municipalities. We've consistently requested amendments to the Act to allow us to levy a greater share to accommodate the kind of redevelopment that takes place at the City of Toronto. Regrettably, the asks that have been made
Fallen on
over the course
deaf
of the
ears?
years by council has not been completely implemented.
Yep, so that continues to fall on deaf ears. I wonder why that is. So now let me ask you a question. And now we're just talking water, so we're talking hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars just in one division with respect to growth-related infrastructure. So when we undertake our DC bylaw reviews, which we're entitled to, and we have to deal with this provincially legislated Development Charges Act and the restrictions of it, how much of the shortfall do you think we can make up in Toronto Water if we try and squeeze every last element, this $350 million? Have you guys looked at this and said, we're going to squeeze the heck out of this thing and we're still 350 short? Or are you saying we're 350 short, but we're going to have a discussion and see if we can close the gap? And can we close it entirely?
Certainly. So the bylaw has a life expectancy of 5 years. It's expected to expire middle of 2018. So we're coming forward with a background study and a new development charge bylaw for council consideration in January. That will be before the executive committee. I cannot speculate as to what the bylaw rates will be at this time, but certainly the objective is to maximize the rates to the extent permitted by legislation.
By legislation, okay. So you still anticipate that we won't be able to close the gap and taxpayers and families in the city will be continuing to subsidize the development community in this city?
Through you, Chair.
As reflective of every other year for the last 20
Certainly.
years?
I mean, the
Just a yes
staff
or
have
no.
always attempted to maximize the rates within the prescribed legislative framework, and we continue to do that. And the report that you will see in January will bear that out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll go to Councillor Carroll next for questions. Councillor Carroll?
Sorry, didn't know I was next.
You're next.
Yeah, well, I think I'll actually start with the more local thing, and then I'll go back to the big numbers. If we go to slide 49, the service standards, I am just wondering, we're not asking for extra operating staff, but I note that in service standards, those two things that take investigation, that are really staff-intensive work, water service line leaking, water service line low pressure, where it takes a lot of customer interaction, then it takes a lot of investigations, constituency work on our end, so I know it's a huge amount of work on your end as well, and then the solution itself takes a while to figure out and implement. And we're always below in this service standard. This is a tough thing to tackle. Do you have enough resources to do this? Is this where we're gapping, and is this where we need to get some people in? Because these are really tough files in councillors' offices.
It's through Mr. Chair. So the customer care realignment that I was talking about was specifically designed to address those issues. So
Those two in particular, the
the two in
superstars?
particular, and to increase the ability for Toronto Water staff to communicate more effectively and regularly with councillor's office, but also with residents. So essentially, just to describe it the best way I can, right now, the way we've been managing it is we had staff going out there, and they were responsible for a whole basket of different things that they were doing, repairing things, checking things. And what we've done now is we've pulled apart those tasks, and we've divided it into pure operational things. They stay in operations, but that front end, first response, triage, investigative work, that basket of services has gone to this newer group, and we're going to start training people to just focus on that. So that's what we're finding is people were getting bogged down doing more of the operational stuff. They couldn't get to these other ones as quickly as they would like. So it's a different way of triaging.
Yeah.
And all we have done for 2017 is align the units and start doing the management structure. Where we're going to start to see the improvements is once we get into the job reclassifications and the pulling apart of those tasks.
But not just the triaging, but these are the hard-to-close files?
Exactly.
They'll be able to stay on it
And this team will
till
be
it's closed.
focused on the hard to close in a dedicated fashion. But I have to go through that process, and that's going to take still about another year and a half, but we've started that program.
Okay, and if I can have one other, Mr. Chair, because the detailed stuff I can look at in the analyst notes, but I noticed when you were talking about capital and spending, where we haven't got it done, where the money's still sitting around is where you said there were some issues getting tenders out.
Yes.
Do we have dedicated resources in procurement, or do they need more resources? Do you need more resources? Because you're not asking for any more resources.
So we do fund dedicated resources in purchasing, both on the operating and capital side. I believe some of the challenges have been tied around the restructuring and change that's happening in purchasing itself as well. It is trying to streamline and implement new ways of doing things. So some of the tenders have been slower in getting out than what we would like, just the tail end of this year. We started off really good, so we have plenty of resources. Now we just need the realignment to happen, and so we can start pushing the work out. So I believe we budgeted enough. It's now getting the work out the door.
But you don't need more resources to get the work out the door.
I don't think more bodies will help us when you're going through a process change, which is what purchasing is going through right now. You know, more bodies aren't going to help push them out the door. The tenders are ready. We just need people pushing them out to the market for us.
You just said people again. I'm just giving you a hard time.
What I meant was the processes. Right
Yeah,
now, they're
yeah.
in the midst of restructuring. They
Okay.
probably have enough resources. They're just going through change right now themselves.
Okay, I'll reserve judgment. Thanks, I'll take
And
your
so
word
will
for
I. So I'm waiting waiting through that restructure.
Thanks, Councillor. Any other committee members? Councillor Mihevc, then Nunziata.
Yes, thank you very much, and excuse me, this is my first time through this in several years. Where are we with the lead pipe replacement program? How much of that is still left, percentage-wise or
So,
percentage-wise?
well,
Is there a slide on
we go by numbers instead of a percentage. No, there's not a specific slide in here. We did report to council recently with respect to where we're at, where we now estimate that we're below 30,000 lead services, and that's the city-owned portion only.
Right, of course. How long before we finish that, and do we have a good strategy in place for that?
Our strategy, our target is to try to remove about 5,000 of those a year.
In 6 years, we're done.
Well, it all depends on the big driver, which is the capital program. A lot of our capital program, so whenever we go and do a water main, we'll change out the substandard services. Right now, a lot of the water main work that we've been doing have been on arterial roads or in other areas where we're not finding as many lead services as we were finding, say, even 5, 6 years ago, where a lot of the water main work was on streets where they had a lot more lead services. So we've been not hitting that target number. We've been below that by 1,000 or 2,000 a year. So it might be within 7 to 10 year range.
Could the money, could this program be sped up if we had more resources in this area, perhaps taking it from other areas, given that it is such a safe and frankly health concern?
So with respect to speeding that program up, one of the key things that we brought forward to council several years ago is you do not want to do a lead service, or partial lead service replacement program, which is what we were doing in 2007, 2008. You don't want to be doing that anymore. You do want to coordinate it when you're doing your infrastructure. So it's really driven by the water main program. So accelerating any standalone program, we would never recommend that. In fact, we recommend going against that trend.
Lost water rate. You push water into the system here, comes out of the pipes here. How much are we losing in between?
So the numbers that we calculate, so there's two components to that. Well, we'll call it total non-revenue water equates to about 14 to 15% of our production. Now, in that non-revenue, we know that some get used by Parks, Forestry, and Recreation, by firefighting, et cetera. So we back those numbers out. We end up with a lost water of about 9 to 10% of our system.
And are we going in the right direction there?
So from
That's
the
money.
standpoint, from what we see, yes, on the lost water, we're going in the right direction. We do have actually a dedicated team on leak detection that has a program, and they're going out and putting in sensors in our system. It was in one of our slides. I didn't highlight it, but maybe I will now. We are putting in all kinds of sensors into our system. We just started that this year. Our plan is to have pressure sensors out in what used to be dumb pipes. We had no information coming from them. In about a year, we're going to have over 200 sensors out in the field giving us
That number
data
should
of
be
what's
dri-
happening.
that should
We
be
can
driven
use
down.
that to pinpoint whether we have problems in our system, and we can correlate that with our meter data, because we have much better meter data as well. So that's all tied to our long-term plan to find these water losses.
Great, okay, I'm good there. The surplus, you just throw the surplus into the capital reserve, right?
Yes, every year, whenever there's operating, it goes first to rate stabilization. If our rate stabilization is at 30 million, it then goes into capital.
I see. Wholesale price to York Region,
Yes.
how is that determined? What's a
So
wholesale?
there's
I don't
a
know what wholesale
specific
price is.
formula that's tied to an agreement. We did have that reviewed by the Auditor General last year, and it was a recommendation to look at renegotiating the cost of capital component of that agreement. And we did approach York Region and asked them to see about changing that component. And we've actually embarked on a joint engineering assignment to try to calculate that. Unfortunately, if they don't want to amend that, they don't have to yet. We do have an opportunity, though, and that agreement does reopen within a 5-year time period, and then we can sit down and renegotiate that rate.
So now it's by goodwill, later on, we'll be able to just kind of do it.
Oh, it's in our work plan, and it's tied to one of the Auditor General recommendations.
If you don't mind, I don't want to hog the floor. If you want to go around to others and come back to me.
Yeah, well, we can do a second round if anybody wants. So, Councillor Nunziata?
Yes, As far as basement flooding,
Yes.
the 2013 storm, so where are we in the funding on all those projects that were identified in certain parts of the city that were priority for new infrastructure?
So from the funding perspective, the program has sufficient monies in it. In fact, this year we had to take some money out of the back end of the 10-year, and that's tied to when we analyze the ability to deliver on the vast majority of the program. As we get more environmental assessments completed, some of the projects are bogging down in that they're difficult to build because we have to acquire either easements or even acquire private property. So some of the projects we'd love to build are taking a lot longer to get out the door. So we've had to adjust our cash flow because of that. There's been no other reason why we've taken money out. It's only because it's taking longer to accomplish certain tasks. But otherwise, if we could go faster, we would come to you and say, put more money back into this program.
Yeah, but why is it taking so long? Like, why?
As I indicated, one of the key issues that we're running into, I'll give you a perfect example. One of the solutions that we need to do in a particular ward is to put a new outfall in between two properties. So now we have two homeowners to talk to and put a pipe and get an easement between their properties to put an outfall in a ravine. To negotiate that, to sit down, that takes time. And in fact, one of the things I didn't highlight in here, but there is a request on the capital side for us to fund 4 staff in real estate law, be a senior lawyer, a junior lawyer, and 2 conveyancers to help expedite the expropriation and/or land acquisition component so we can get the basement flooding projects back on track.
Well, in some parts, it's taking years, which is really
Yes.
unacceptable, because we justify to our constituents the reason for the water increase every year. It started off when Mel Lastman, David Miller, Mayor, 9% water increase every year, that the reason for this is that we're doing these projects, and here we are 10, 15 years later, and we still are waiting because there's problems. You know, really, it's hard to justify that to your constituents for the increase, and then we're not doing anything.
So, Mr. Chair, I guess the only way I can answer that is the money will be there when we're ready to
Well,
deliver the
yeah.
project
What, 10
because of
years?
the funding commitment. And so as part of the budget release, and I believe the information's going live later on today, you will get the 5-year update on the capital projects for basement flooding, specifically the projects for 2018, 19, et cetera, as well as updates on a ward basis of what's going on. So we are trying to push the work as quickly as we can, but if the project's not ready to be delivered, then we're not recommending that we just keep the money there. We then use it for another priority this year.
And then when it comes time to put the money back in, we say we don't have
We
the
will
money.
readjust, we would bring forward a plan that would readjust it again, because one of the priorities that we've heard from council is basement flooding projects. So as that part of our exercise, when we set the 10-year plan, if we know we can deliver more, we will be coming forward and recommending an increase to that program, and we will offset it with a lesser priority capital project.
On page 49, the service standards, these are calls to 311, correct? Customer service?
Yes.
So the allocated hours, so is this telling me that how long it takes once there's a call that comes into 311?
Yeah, so those are the standards. So for example, if we get a
Well,
call.
what if it takes 2 or 3 days?
Well, that's on that specific call. We would not have met that standard, and that's why where you see we did not hit our performance objectives. So this data is saying that, for example, on a possible water main break, our standard is to have someone investigate that within a 2-hour period. And as of this year, we're at 82.7% of the time. Our target's 85% of the time, because we know we can't do it 100% of the time because of spikes or volume issues. And so this year hasn't been too bad. But where you do see the problem is the line that's leaking, getting out to that's usually the service lines where people are reporting it. And that's where the restructuring in Toronto Water that customer care unit that I'm talking about is focusing on improving those objectives, the standards that we have in place. We're not meeting those ones as often as we should.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Campbell next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Lou, you're going to spend almost $13 billion in the next 10 years in this division. Is that correct?
That is the forecasted plan right now.
That's a couple of subway lines worth of expenditures right there.
We'll have some large tunnels as well, but you won't be able to drive subways through them, only sewage.
Hey, coordination of capital.
They're a little too small.
When I look at page 49 has a listing of all your capital.
What number?
Page slide 49, major projects underway in 2017.
30? It could be 30.
49.
49 was the service standards, sorry.
Yeah, I thought that was service levels. I think you're in the wrong,
Maybe I'm in the wrong deck.
Okay.
I've got two
Which one?
decks. I've
Sorry,
got
could
the-
you just repeat the title again?
they updated.
What title?
It shows the major projects underway in 2017.
I got it right now. Up on
Okay,
the slide.
so the question is, what does Toronto Water track the amount of contractor claims against all of those contracts? And if so, at what rate of claim? What is the rate of claims?
So Toronto Water doesn't track that data. Engineering Construction Services, who administer a lot of our capital program, they track that for us and handle the construction side. So I'd have to ask them for that data. I don't have it right.
Because when you look at the spending, you were spending in 2007, 2008, you're spending 250 to 310 million.
Yes.
And then a flush with money, the expenditures double on capital. So now we're spending literally double that. I mean, wouldn't you, as the general manager of water, want to know if all of those monies are being well spent, the projects are being well designed and well carried out, properly carried out? Because if they're not being well designed and properly carried out, that's what triggers the claims.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So what I can tell you from general, you asked me specific numbers. Do I have percentages? I don't have that. What I can tell you from our general review, because we do track that, when we sit down and do our capital program, we are working with the project managers on ECS to try to close out existing projects and commitments. And as well, when we do budgeting and tendering, we are looking at how close they are with estimates. So I'd say for the vast majority of the program, it's working quite well. We do have certain projects where we do have challenges, and they typically will be contractor related, and in other cases it could be design related. We could have issues with either the consultant engineer that designed the project, and it's really not the contractor's fault, it's a design issue, or it could be the contractor delivery. And what we'll do, and we do have litigation, we will pursue and claim damages against either one of those parties.
So you're telling me there are some internal controls to measure sort of the effectiveness of the way the whole capital plan is unfolding, but do you ever report out to council on how well it's unfolding? In other words, do we ever receive a report that says that we are spending $680 million and it's being spent in the most efficient, meaningful means possible? Because $13 billion over 10 years is a lot to ask from taxpayers. I don't know what it was the previous 10 years, but we've had in all of these increases. And it's almost, I mean, it is pardon the pun, but it's a sinkhole of money. And
Capital intensive, absolutely.
very capital intensive. And as you know, I visited the wastewater plant down at Humber Bay this week. And I can see it, but it's hard to get confidence that the money is being spent.
I appreciate what you're saying. And to Mr. Chair, what I would say to you is that engineering and construction services, when they bring forward their budget, their metrics and their service levels identify those very issues, because that is their business, is the capital delivery side. And that's what we ask of them. Please show us your metrics. Please show us that you're performing efficiently. And so they're giving us those metrics as they present in their budget. So that will come forward when you see the ECS budget, which will occur as part of the property tax discussion.
So this is an ongoing process. So you must have received this information in the past.
Yes.
But has it ever been reported out to council?
I believe through the budget process, when ECS presents its service standards, like I'm showing you
Right.
the metrics that we use, ECS has developed a number of metrics that they present to council on how they complete their projects, transportation and water projects.
Right.
And it shows whether they're being efficient in the delivery of those projects. So we have our internal discussions, but then they also present to you as committee and council.
Thank you. Councillor Burnside next.
Thank you. Through you, pretty straightforward question. For the basement flooding program, you move forward, I believe it's when the net cost per household is 32,000 or less, is that right?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is if it is storm-related projects. If it is a sanitary pipe, so if we identify in the environmental assessment that we have deficient or substandard sanitary pipes, they get programmed automatically because that is a environmental and health and a health issue. Stormwater is the one component that council said if you find you want to upgrade stormwater pipes, you then use the $32,000 per benefiting household cap.
Okay, so what happens if it's over $32,000?
Then what we do is we identify it on the list. You will get that in the briefing note. We track that, and we identify that that will be there. And if we ever do a state of good repair project then on that street, we will then pull the scope of work that we identified and complete it at that time.
So theoretically, you could have a problem street, which is very expensive to address, that then therefore wouldn't get addressed.
That's correct. They would have to wait for the normal life cycle change. So if we did not have a basement flooding program and people had issues, it would be now prioritizing every pipe in the city, and you're now dealing with the most critical one, and so people are waiting a long time. What the basement flooding program did is allowed us to prioritize deficiencies that we identify and have some go earlier.
But based more on
exceeds that
cost.
amount, then it falls into the regular programming
So
cycle.
what percentage of our sewers, if you will, are combined?
Total citywide, there's about 23% of the service area that have combined, that are serviced by combined sewers. Total number of pipes is, I think, is around 30%, but the service area is only about 23%. So it's the older core.
And there's a long-term plan to address that?
So the long-term plan is tied to our wet weather flow master plan. And it is a long-term plan. And so it's a combination of doing source control at site, doing disconnections where it makes sense, removing stormwater from going into combined if we can do that. And we're doing that as we find it. And then the larger programs, which are the creation of the tunnels, which you see a key project.
Right, so how long-term? What does that mean?
20 to 25 years before that whole plan is implemented.
From 2003,
Yes,
25
essentially
years?
what happened, well, I'll give you the history on that. Basement flooding was a part of the original wet
Like a
weather flow
round
master
table here.
plan, but it was a very small part until we had very large storms. And what we had to do is pull that piece out, grow that program, and now we show you both. But basement flooding really is a wet weather issue. One is volume and the other one's quality.
Just from an environmental perspective, wouldn't it not make sense to speed that up?
If you had the money, yes, the answer is yes. But the issue is how do you manage all of the priorities and stay
Yes, this is
in a
in
positive
stereo,
reserve?
sorry. Sorry, say.
So I'll say it again. It is a priority. State of good repair is a priority. And what we need to do is make sure we have sufficient money. And as I showed you on the previous slide, our reserves do bottom out by 2027. So to accelerate all of those projects and growth as well, we have to manage. You can only put so many projects in. If we had more money, we could accelerate those projects.
That's, I think, probably music to Councillor Davis's ears, but, oh, thank you. Thank you. So my last question is, if you wanted to, so we're now about what, halfway through from 2003, 2028, so about half, we got another 15 years, let's say. If you wanted to cut that down in half, how much would you have to increase water rates?
Yeah. Yeah, no, you'd have to probably, You probably have to start generating
Hold on,
another-
sorry, I'm just trying to, just not so much respect for me, just more respect for Lou. Thanks. I don't expect it from me, it's okay.
You'd have to probably generate at least another 200 to 300 million clear capital a year. So you're probably looking at 2 or 3 years of 9s and 10s again.
Again, above the 5, so like 14% or
You'd
not?
have to jump from the 5 where you'd have to go back to 9s and 10s
So
again
it's about another 5%.
for at least 2 or 3 more years. And then you would be generating enough money to allow us to accelerate some projects.
So that would basically be, was it like $47 more, right? I think it one,
No, but
next year?
each year and compounded. So that's why you have to look at it on
Sure.
a longer-term plan.
Okay.
Thanks,
thank you.
Councillor. Just wanted to remind everybody, we have a sundown clause for 4 p.m. I do want to get to solid waste and Toronto parking, but specifically solid waste. So I just want to, when you're asking those questions, we also have another opportunity next Friday to have questions as well. This is not your only opportunity to delve into that. So just want to, if you don't get your questions done today, we will have another opportunity next week. I'll go to outside councillors now. Councillor Fletcher to begin.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to page 44, major projects to be awarded in 2018, and looking at the Ashbridges Bay Sewage Treatment Plant. And that was an EA that was done a number of years ago for the outfall, right?
That's
Yes?
correct. Started in 1989.
So that has been all approved, and now you're prepared actually to build it in 2000. You're going to award it in
We're
2000.
going to award the construction in 2018.
So part of that, this plan had always been a embellishment, fixing up that area that's actually the shoreline, because the spit, Leslie Street spit, essentially runs into the sewage treatment plant, lands on the shoreline. Is that part of this, or is that not part of this at this point?
Yes, that whole area on the south part of the plant, as it touches Tommy Thompson Park and the spit area, will have a number of projects. So the outfall is one of them. There's also going to be work on a landform project that we're doing jointly with TRCA to address some erosion issues and to give us the land to build a high-rate treatment facility to handle the flows from the tunnel that will come from the Don. And on top of that, we're going to also do the ultraviolet disinfection system, all within that area. So
Yes.
we need to do some work on a roadway in.
But this was part of the Lake Ontario Park Plan. So how much of the Lake Ontario Park Plan can be realized through this $880 billion project that you're embarking on?
So the
If any?
issue
Is it
on the
plan- can
final
I just ask you,
design,
Is it planned at all, or we should probably introduce that?
no, that Lake Ontario Park Plan is not in this design element.
Thank you. I just wanted to establish that we may have to do that. So in the city of Toronto, there are now 30,000 new residents moving in every year, which puts a pretty big burden onto the water system. Would you agree with me? Pressure on our sewers, pressure on
It
our
does, it's
water?
been offset by everybody else reducing consumption. So where the pressure we're finding is in specific areas.
And so when we're dealing with areas that are prone to basement flooding, which I know in the East End, we have quite a number of them.
Yes, you
as
do.
the water travels to the sewage treatment plant, and it's built up quite heavily. So is there anything special you're looking at, any extra costs on new developments or any type of constriction on them in order to make sure that they don't add to the already problematic issue of basement flooding in the East End of Toronto?
Yes, one of the key things that we bring forward as Toronto Water, whenever we review a development application, is one, is it in a basin flooding area where we have surcharging concerns? If that is the case, we will identify that we have concerns with that development application, and unless those are addressed, we would recommend that that development be placed on a hold provision until the servicing aspects are addressed. And that's happened with some of the files. Other files, the developers have worked with us to mitigate those problems.
So they're expected to mitigate that problem. They want 20 floors, and you say it can only really handle 8, then you hold pretty firm on that.
If we do not have a project identified as growth-related, and I showed a slide earlier where we do have some projects identified, but let's say it's in an area where we don't,
Right.
we would say to them, they have to wait till the infrastructure is upgraded, or if they want to proceed, they're going to have to fund that upgrade.
Okay. And last question is, there's a, Tommy Thompson Park shows, this is an unfunded TRC capital projects, a master plan phase 2 of $17 million between now and 2025. What is that comprised of?
Through,
you aware?
Mr. Chair, you'd have to ask the TRCA on the specifics of that, because it's their ask to us as a city. So we have yet to be able to sit down and drill down on each individual unmet need. We've got funding in
So
here.
each one of these you don't know about. So if
We will
let's say-
have just a general description right
Okay.
now.
So if, really, should we not have a little, someone, we may say, well, okay, we want to advance something. In case anyone's advancing anything, should we not have some more information about each one of these in our budget process? Would that not be recommended, Mr.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that would occur as part of the TRCA and debate,
When
and not
they
the water
come,
one.
they will
We've got
articulate.
$150 million of funding over 10 years for TRCA already in this budget. This is over and above that.
I understand. So we can expect from them a description of each one of these and the costing?
Yes.
Just as you have given us.
As part
that
of
for
their
yours,
process.
As part of their submission.
That's correct.
And lastly, I see that the sewage treatment plant, it's 880 million for, there's many more millions, though. What would you say the upgrade to the plant currently is here when we're
The
looking?
10-year plan for Ashbridges Bay right now is about $1.2 to $1.3 billion.
1.2
Work over the
to
next 10 years.
And with about 880 million of that coming up in 18.
And these are contract values. It won't be spent all in 1 year. It'll be stretched over a number of years. So what I was showing you is the total project cost that has to be committed. And that's why we'll be drawing down our reserve.
So
Thank you,
we could
Councillor.
get a-
That's your last question.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
If I could just
Councillor
follow on
Davis?
the I assume I'm next.
You are next.
The wet weather flow and the Dawn and Central Waterfront project. Are you reporting out on that soon?
On that specific project,
On, the- to give direction to proceed with any?
our council's already given us direction. In fact, that project is out for tender right now, the construction of
con-
Phase 1.
And
So
we
if we
have,
look at this slide here, Phase 1 being the one that's highlighted in red, that's out
Okay.
for tender right now.
and that's going to be a huge contract. That will have to come to council for approval.
Oh, for approval, yes. Once we get the contract award,
Okay, so can you,
we estimate about 500
I've said this before,
million.
can you brief the Dawn councilors
Sure.
on the Dawn project? We haven't had a briefing on it for some time.
When we bring that
That's okay.
contract award forward, we
No,
will,
just any time between now and then would be very good.
sure, we could do
Okay.
that.
I just wanted to go to the question of the unfunded, sorry, the reserve. So by 2025, the reserve will be gone. And
Excuse me, Council, can I
that's-
just, it's a bit of chatter in here. I'm just wondering, some people are finding it hard to actually hear the questions and answers, so if we can maybe just quiet down just a little bit.
Talking for your admonition.
Yes, here's the slide. I pulled it up for you. So just so everybody could follow, it would be the green line being the new reserve forecast based on the green bars being the new capital plan presented.
Councillor DiCiano and Mahavik, and others, it's hard to hear. And there's a lot of chatter happening, so if we can just quiet down a little bit. Thanks, Council. I'll give you a few extra seconds.
capital reserve bottoms out in 2025, you have proposed the way to address some of that is development charges, but we don't know whether or not it will. So you have also proposed to this council a stormwater charge, which was rejected by this council. You proposed a net neutral stormwater charge, but had the net neutral piece of it not been part of your proposal, in your first modeling, how much would a stormwater charge have generated?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the stormwater proposal that we brought forward to council in May would not have shown any other different capital program. It was net.
No, no, no.
It was net neutral
No, no.
across the 10 years. That's the
Ms.
way we had presented it.
No, Mr. DeJano,
Then I misunderstood your question, sorry.
I said I know it was, Lou, I know it was net neutral.
Yes.
That was a choice you made in your modeling to bring forward. Had
That's
it
correct.
not been net neutral, what would it have generated? Because you were going to take it back out of the water rate.
Through Mr. Chair, we had not done any forecasting of what it should be, so it would be entirely up to council to decide if it wanted to charge more at that time. We did not forecast anything above the net neutral in that report.
How much was going to be taken out of the water rates to make it net neutral?
So the component that was
You know what?
water related was 28% of the total budget, it was about 280 million.
It was going to generate potential.
No, it was going to take out of the revenue stream we generate, well, 1.289 billion, roughly 280 million of that revenue stream would have been removed off of that, and we would have just charged people differently for that. But
Okay,
the
all
two
right.
combined would have still
So-
been around 1.289 million. We would not have been generating more revenue from that.
That is, okay, you're missing my point. If we had done both, not made it net neutral, and introduced,
I'm just saying we didn't look at, we looked at the only one option.
I heard 280 million. Okay, the cost, okay, it's, of course there was a revenue generating model, but No.
Carol, Councillor Davis has.
I'm sorry, as a member, I have to take a point of personal privilege and perhaps a clarification. When this originally went out to consultation, there was a revenue-generating draft proposal as one of many options. So this is not wishful thinking. It was a thing that existed long ago.
So through you, Mr. Chair, if I can add clarity to that
no,
point.
I've had one question.
Councillor Carroll, please.
I can add some clarity to that point. That was prior to council agreeing to do 2 8s and 2 5s. So the options that we were having to consider at that time, because we had to defer over $1 billion worth of capital over a 10-year plan, one of the issues that council said is go out and look at how you can make up that lost revenue. You could either do that by looking at stormwater, or what we decided was to raise rates beyond the 9 years of 9%. And so it made the decision to just charge extra rates at that time. So I believe that's what that conversation.
Councillor Davis, you have about 45 seconds left or so.
Okay, thank you. So I wanted to ask about the cost of inflation. You identify on page 26 and on 31 the costs of inflation. And I wondered, what is that of existing service contracts? Are you able, every year I ask, how can we find out the costs, the inflationary costs of contracts?
Through you, Mr. Chair,
Is this payroll, these are not payroll contracts, these are other contracts.
So on some of our chemical contracts, for example, we have a CPI index in there, and we'll tie it to a certain commodity, because some of the commodities we buy, we know what they are. And so the index factors will vary on the contract that we have. We'll use general Toronto CPI in some cases, but others are specific to a CPI index based on that commodity.
Okay. You know what, I'm going to ask this
That's your
another
last
time.
question.
Oh,
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Layton.
Thank you very much. Through you, Mr. Budget Chief. Mr. DiGeronimo, are you clairvoyant? Can you tell the future?
I can't, but I might be able to guess what you're going to ask me.
You stole my follow-up there. I had it all planned out. On slide 54, can you tell us what this slide says?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this slide shows the residential cost comparison with our GTA neighbors, and we remain in the lower band of municipalities when it comes to the cost of water for 2017.
And can you put it to the next slide, please?
This slide shows a large industrial customer, and this is our Block 2 rate that we offer industry, and we remain in the lower band of municipalities for the cost of water for them.
Can you tell us what the industrial water surcharge is?
The industrial water surcharge rate is a program that we have for industries or manufacturers that release their effluent, the higher than bylaw limit. So it's overstrength is another term we use it. And so we call it industrial waste surcharge program for 5 treatable parameters. We will treat that extra strength waste for them at an extra cost.
So who sets those bylaw limits? Who sets the limits that we can discharge into the natural environment?
So just to be clear, the bylaw and the limits that I'm referring to are the discharges into our sewers.
Yes.
So-
But who sets
so
the
we
limit?
set
Who sets
that.
the limit that we have to clean it up to?
So the limits that we discharge to the environment specifically is the Ministry of the Environment
So the min-
and/or the federal government as well. But
So the Ministry of the Environment tells us that we need to clean up our effluent, our water effluent, to a certain rate.
that's correct. We're regulated by them.
Some of our large industrial water users put out these chemicals into the water that we have to clean up.
That's correct.
And this effluent, this pollution, isn't something that would typically come out in high quantities from a residential water user.
No, the vast majority of water customers meet our bylaw limits into our sewers. There's only a few hundred that do not.
So how much money does the industrial water surcharge collect?
The total program generates about $12 million annually.
$12 million.
Fluctuates 12 to 13 million.
$12 million, $13 million. How much money would we collect if we charged for every parameter that, if we charged the full amount to clean every parameter that is emitted by the large industrial water users?
So based on the agreements that we have in place for 2017, we're roughly about $1.8 million range.
So we're giving up about an eighth of the revenue that we should be collecting out of this program. Is that math about right? About a sixth. Say a sixth.
It'd be maybe close.
What does, I've asked this before, and just as a basis for comparison, what does $2 million roughly mean over the whole water, the whole water rate base?
So as total revenue, it's a very small percentage. It's 0.02.
Here's a better question. How many households could we deliver basement flooding programs to with an additional $2 million a year?
Additional $2 million would get you a very small basement flooding project, maybe a short street,
But a street.
but a street probably.
Okay. Who else has recommended that we do full cost recovery for our industrial water surcharge?
Well, within the water, wastewater industry, moving to full cost recovery is an objective that most utilities strive for. It's also been advocated by economists within the province, as well as our Auditor General.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Layton. We'll go next to Councillor de Beermaker.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation today. I guess my first question is maybe a technical one. On slide 44, it shows the Ashbridges Bay Treatment Plant outfall. Can you explain to me what an outfall actually is and what it actually does?
Sure, Mr. Chair. So if I tie it into Councillor Layton's question, he said you're discharging to the environment, and this is actually the key discharge to the environment from the Ashbridges Bay plant. So this is where, after we treat all of the sewage we receive at Ashbridges Bay, we discharge the clean wastewater into the lake. Right now, at present, we have an older outfall constructed in the 50s. It's only about, I believe, a kilometer out into the lake with a very short diffuser run, as they call it. This new one.
Sir, what is a diffuser run?
Sorry. Okay, so
it's a pipe, it goes out into
it's
the
a
lake?
long pipe that runs out in the lake, and then we have to discharge at various points. So we don't just leave the pipe open at the end and spew it out. There are diffusers that come out the top of the pipe.
Baby pipes.
Baby pipes that discharge it. If you think of it kind of like the reverse of air coming in a room, you have a diffuser head that allows the air in. Same idea, but in the water, and it lets the water out, and it spreads it out over a larger area, allowing it for it to assimilate in the water.
That's what that picture is here.
So what we're proposing to build is something much larger than what we have now. And so this will be 3 kilometers out into the lake, And the diffuser run, which is that band that's highlighted, can you see that, this area right here, would be 1 kilometer in length itself. So we will get much better mixing in the lake.
And what is the riser?
And what is a riser? Essentially, if you think of it as a pipe that sits on top of the pipe that's coming out. In fact, this pipe will be a tunnel through rock. So we're going to tunnel through rock, and then these shafts are going to come up through the rock.
Okay.
And on top of it, we'll have a cap for the diffuser head. And that'll have then a series of these discharge points 1 kilometer in length. So the whole pipe will be 3 kilometers out in the lake. And all the baby risers come out and they'll discharge out. It's all underwater.
I think there's only one councillor asking questions at the moment.
It's a, yeah, just extend my time.
I'll keep bringing pictures as we make progress. How's that?
And through Mr. Chair, I just wanted to check on slide 45. It says in the unfunded TRCA capital needs, there's the Scarborough Bluffs West Study EA. If my memory is correct, Councillor Ainsley moved a motion to fund that through one of your reserve accounts. So why would it be in an unfunded category when it's actually been approved and funded by council, if my memory is correct?
So through you, Mr. Chair, we did fund a component of that. This is an incremental ask over and above what we already had funded. So we did fund a component of the West. There's more money being requested as they have to do more work.
Okay, so we can sort of talk offline
Yes.
to make sure our numbers are correct. And through you, Mr. Chair, are we today, or in 2018, are we at a full cost recovery for the cost of our water? For you to create it, filter it, dispose of it, plan for the future, do everything, are we paying the full cost of water today?
Again, I would say yes, if our objective is only to maintain what we have with some service improvements.
And
The answer would be no if we wanted all of the service improvements that we're talking about, which would be accelerating the wet weather flow, accelerating basement flooding, then we don't have enough money. That's why those programs are moving more slowly, because we're trying to match it to the revenue stream.
And if we were to want to, and I'm assuming you would advise us that we should do all of those good things because you've got them recommended to us. So what would it take? Is it the same as Councillor Burnside, similar to Councillor Burnside's question to you? If we wanted to achieve those objectives, what increase would we need? Would it be 5% for 3 years, or what ballpark would that be?
It would be in that, again,
Similar.
I would go back to the other example, I'd say it would probably be upwards of the 8 to 9 to 10% range for 3 or 4 years in order to generate several hundred million more clear revenue a year, because those are big projects. The ones that need to come in, each set of the wet weather flow projects is $300, $400, $500 million range.
And to follow up on Councillor Burnside's line of questioning, if we did call it an acceleration levy or an acceleration fee as part of our water rate, because they're capital projects for those number of years, because they're capital projects, would we be able to eliminate that someday? If we said we're charging you an extra, say, 10% over 3 years?
Dedicated?
Yeah.
That's entirely a financing strategy that I'd put to Mr. Farag, but I think all of those could be looked at if council wanted to.
Could we
Last question, councillor.
Could we theoretically put on it, I'm going to make up a number, an extra 5% as an acceleration levy that would be there for 7 years to do all those good projects, and then once they're done, remove that levy, or that fee?
Certainly, that's one of several options that are available to us to deal with an accelerated program. The other may be, debt financing.
Okay.
Thank you, councillor. Seeing no other questions, I think we will be going on to the, thank you, Lou. Appreciate that. Again, we will have an opportunity for more questions next week as you get more into depth into this, so this is not your last opportunity. Next, and again, we're 25 to 3. We have a hard cutoff for 4 p.m., so just wanted to let everybody know that. Next, we'll do solid waste, and General Manager Jim McKay is going to be coming up and presenting with his team. And if we could have all the staff to move out as quickly as possible so we can begin the next presentation. Councillor Davis and Lou, can you maybe take your conversation out? Thanks. Welcome, Jim. I will pass the mic over to you. And again, just quickly, can I please have, on the left-hand side here, can I please have the staff? Lou, can the group over there, it's very hard to hear. I can't even hear Jim from here. So if we can ask everybody to quiet down, thank you. Okay.
All right. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of Budget Committee. I will try to be as brief as possible given the time that we've got left today. I am going to start with the answer and then show you how I got there. So the first slide is basically a summary of what our 2018 budget looks like for the Solid Waste Management Services Division. We're not proposing any new fees other than what we've already got today. We're not making any changes to service levels. We're requesting no new permanent full-time equivalents or staff. The recommended rate increase that we're bringing forward is actually below the rate of inflation, and that will still allow us to make a reserve contribution for future capital that will be sufficient to fulfill our 10-year capital forecast. So those are the answers.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Would you like me to continue? So if you bear with me for a few more minutes, I'll at least give you the rest of the presentation. So just to brag on behalf of all of my staff who do a fantastic job every day, just a few things that we have accomplished. We're rolling out and just nearing completion, rolling out of monthly billing for all our multi-residential customers. This is something that came through customer service feedback, is that they want monthly billing so that they can accrue it on a monthly basis. In the next couple of weeks, it isn't quite live yet. We're actually launching the Solid Waste Store, which will be an online store to purchase bag tags to start. So you don't have to go to Canadian Tire anymore to purchase those. You can simply buy them online, pay for them online, and they'll be shipped to your household. So a much more convenient option for our customers. Green Bin 2.0 rollout will be complete within the next couple of weeks, and we'll certainly inform all of you when we're substantially complete on doing that. Doing lots of work on the contamination side, which I'll speak to in a minute. We've been investing in some electronic apps for our parks and nights collection to improve the efficiency there. We have developed a coffee pod testing methodology, which is certainly front and center in the news over the last couple of days, and I'm sure will be for the next couple of days. We've got a renewable natural gas consultant retainer on board now, so our consultant is on board to help us with our renewable natural gas projects that we brought forward, a summary to Public Works Committee last year. We successfully completed the Mayor's Towering Challenge, which we got a lot of really good insight specific to different buildings on things that they are doing to improve waste diversion. So we're going through all that information now and then trying to apply it to some of the other more problem buildings that we've got. And we received 2 International Solid Waste Association of North America awards for our long-term strategy and for the Green Lane landfill. The organization chart that you see in front of you is essentially the same as what it was last year. We've been doing some minor reorganization throughout the division, but nothing certainly at the higher level to make any difference here. On our staffing, so as I mentioned, no new permanent full-time equivalents are being requested. We are going to be requesting 3 temporary capital-funded positions to support in the implementation of our capital program. A couple things I will flag for you on this slide, we are still having some difficulty in rehiring really 2 types of employees. Skilled trades, the engineers, electricians, millwrights are very difficult to find in the industry right now, and we are still having some challenges retaining our solid waste collection operators, our actual drivers. These are DZ positions, and this is more of an industry issue for both of these types of positions. There's just a shortage in the industry right now. So we've implemented a number of different things to try and approach this. So we've got a people services consultant now within the division that helps with all our recruitment activities. We've developed a solid waste collection operator in training program, so we can bring nearly qualified individuals in and actually just train them up to be the individuals that we need, recognizing there are some individuals out there that may have a DZ, but they need some additional training in order to actually be able to drive the trucks that we have. And we put a lot of focus on our attendance management program, which is working very well. So I think we are the lowest of all the frontline divisions in terms of illness days outstanding. In terms of key priority actions, top of the list is our Blue Bin program contamination reduction. This has a huge financial opportunity for us, not just to improve the quality of the material and the environmental implications around it, but for every percentage point that we can drop our contamination in our Blue Bin, we reduce our cost by around $600,000. We're hovering at 26% right now. If we go up over 27%, that's an immediate equivalent of $5 million a year of additional cost to process that material. So we're doing everything that we can right now to avoid that. We're commissioning the Dufferin Organics Processing Facility, which is our second facility that receives green bin material. We're working on renewable natural gas infrastructure and some future revenue streams that will be non-rate-based revenue that will help offset our operating and capital costs. We are extensively involved with the province and various stakeholders and all of our neighboring municipalities in the GTA and across Ontario on the Waste Free Ontario Act negotiations. This is a new piece of legislation that the province has introduced, which could have some pretty significant implications in the future on how we actually manage waste here in the city. We're looking at opportunities for the Dufferin Material Recovery Facility, which is our old recycling facility that we don't use now. Different ways to develop it, to perhaps use it as a means to process some of this higher contaminated material to improve the quality. We've got a whole project underway now for reviewing all of our key performance indicators so that we are collecting better data to assess the performance of our operations and have more sort of real-time information on exactly what's happening out in the field. Doing lots of work on textiles diversion. So once you pull out all the blue bin recyclable material, all the organic material, the next big piece of that garbage bag is actually textiles right now. So that's a target for us to start diverting that material. And then implementation of business intelligence technology. Again, this is automating some of our KPIs so we have a better day-to-day understanding of the flow of materials and the cost of the flow of those materials so that we can be constantly improving and becoming more efficient. Some of the challenges that we have in our budget: fleet maintenance and the fuel IDC, over to our friends in Fleet Services. This is, as I mentioned last year, because of the delay in purchasing some trucks, the fleet is still older than what it should be. We do have new trucks arriving every day that were purchased back in 2015, so that is helping. It certainly brought some of our costs down. This pressure will largely disappear in 2019 as new trucks start to arrive. So if you remember in our budget last year, we proposed and it was approved a fleet true-up where we go out and purchase a number of new trucks. Those trucks have all been purchased now. They're being built as we speak, and they'll start rolling in next year. So that will really help with some of our operating costs on the fleet side. The increased blue bin contamination rates that I spoke to, we are still losing multi-residential customers to private operators. We've put in a process to track what is actually happening with those buildings after they leave our service, because a condition to be on our service is you've got to have garbage, recycling, and organics as a condition of service. If they get off of our system, we'll go back 3 months later and check to see what they're doing, and a number of them are actually dropping their organics programs, and in some cases we've seen them dropping their recycling programs. So we will be bringing something forward in the new year to look at leveling that playing field to make sure that to me it doesn't matter who provides the service as long as they are providing that three-stream level of service. Existing and new contract terms with escalation factors, which I'll show you the graph in a minute, and then single-family customers in response to downsizing or reducing the rebate on some of our bins. We have more and more customers moving to single-family to the small bins. So in terms of what our operating budget looks like, for gross expenditures and revenues on the left, this is where the money comes from to support the division, and then on the right, this is where it goes. So the ones on the left that I would highlight for you, you can see user fees and the funded portion through the rebates is by far the largest amount. Sundry revenues, we've got the Green Lane landfill there, we've got sale of recyclables, bag tags, other sorts of things there. And then we still receive roughly around $24 million in stewardship funding for the recycling program. And then as you can see, the split is, the primary drivers in terms of cost are, the collection, transfer, processing, and then management of the residual in the division. What this looks like in terms of committed versus variable expenses, I wanted to put this slide up just so you can see how much of our expenses are somewhat committed. These are either contracted services that are long-term contracts with built-in escalation clauses already. The work that we need to do out at Green Lane in order to sustain that asset for disposal over the long term. Some of our IDCs, contribution of the fund so we can maintain state of good repair. So we run, the 2018 impact of CPI alone is around $4.6 million. We've been able to go through, identify some different efficiencies through the system and offset that by about $4.1 million. So we're coming in with a net pressure of roughly $500,000 on a $400 million budget coming into the 18 budget. So we got very, very close to zero, but just not quite there. In terms of pressures, so I mentioned price escalations on some of our contracts that are built in already. We have a few things in the solid waste division that's probably unique to the solid waste division in the city, where we have volume fluctuations. We have some of our contracts, kind of like Lou with the sale of water. Depending on how much water gets sold, it impacts your financials. We have similar types of fluctuations where the amount of garbage that gets produced, in some cases we're paying for that on a per ton basis. If you have less garbage, you pay less. If you have more, you pay more. So there are fluctuations in the system. We also have other sensitivities like the pricing and the commodity market. So sale of recyclable materials can be up or down a couple $1 million a year depending on how the markets are doing. We have issues now potentially with some sale of recyclables because of a new foreign policy called National Sword Program that China has put in place. So our financials are directly impacted by foreign policy from some of these other international and quite distant countries where some of our materials go. So you can see overall we got to 0.1%, where our target was 0, we got to 0.1%. And then the recommended, below are the revenue changes, the recommended rate increase, which I'll show you in a minute, and then some of the other revenue streams. In some cases, our price of recyclables is doing better than what we had planned for, or we're forecasting it'll come in a little bit higher. And then just other recoveries, sale of materials, those sorts of things. In terms of our capital budget, so the priorities here are completion of the Dufferin Organics Processing Facility and Disco Organics Facility. Those are both ongoing construction projects that will be completed in 2018. Maintaining our assets, so our transfer stations and our diversion facilities, investing in state of good repair to maintain those facilities. Landfill cell development is something that is a constant ongoing as we have to manage garbage. We've got to continue to develop cells to put that garbage in. Our long-term waste management strategy implementation. We have 160 closed landfills that we're responsible for, so we've got perpetual care of all those landfills. We've got 4 ongoing biogas utilization projects, which will be a future revenue stream for the division to help offset our costs. Two-way radio replacement is a partnership between solid waste, transportation, water, at least 3 of us. I think there's a 4th in there as well, where we're looking at consolidating all of our resources and moving forward with one option for our radios that we use, and then other various modernization and transformation projects. The 10-year capital budget plan, as you can see, for 18, 114 million overall in the 10-year capital. This drops off over time to down as low as 2025, where we're around $45, $46 million. So we are having a dip in terms of our total capital expenditures over the next little while. And then we'll see a spike, as you can see in the future projection later on, which I'll show you. We've got about 450 million outside of our 10-year forecast. So when I say that the rate that we're bringing forward is acceptable for the 10-year forecast, that's an accurate statement, but we are going to have some major capital that we're going to have to invest in outside of that 10-year forecast. In terms of funding, how that money actually gets used, you can see on the graph on the left there, it's a combination of legislated, state of good repair, various service improvements that we make, and then some growth-related initiatives as well. And then on the right, you can see our split between recoverable debt and how we actually finance through the reserves. Right now, solid waste has $276.8 million in total debt against the division, and certainly we're looking at ways to reduce that debt overall. Finally, I'll talk about the rates. So this is what the rate proposal looks like. If you remember last year, we brought forward a blended rate, which recognizing that our costs by customer type go up and down differentially between customer type year over year. So for multi-residential, it'll be a 1% increase, which is the same as last year. Single family and residential units above commercial is a 2%, which is the same as last year. Bag tags, bin purchases, other more commodity type things that we offer are going up as rate of inflation. The commercial, DAX, schools, and tipping is going up by 5.2%, which again is the same as last year, which brings us in at a blended rate of 1.9, which is a little bit lower than last year, which was at 2.2. This slide deck does not talk about the potential rebate changes and what that may look like. That comes forward as part of the tax budget program. In terms of what that looks like in hard cost to the resident, so if you're a small bin customer, your total annual increase will go up by just shy of $5 a year. That equates to roughly 9.6 cents per week will be the impact to a small bin customer. Sir, let me go back. So the column on the far right will be the total dollar impact to a customer based on the type of bin that you have. So the top row there, if you're a single family customer with a small bin, you will pay an additional $4.99 in 2018 for that service. So right now we're, over the last 9 years, we're running at around a 1.6% rate increase average. So we are trailing the rate of inflation year over year. How will that money get spent? Largely for capital reserves, for state of good repair at the transfer stations and our organics processing facilities, and then that 2018 operating expenditure pressure that we weren't able to mitigate. In terms of where that money gets spent, or whether it's committed or not, you can see for the 18 budget, the money is already either part of legislation that we're required to do in order to comply with legislation, it's already contractually committed, or it's state of good repair activities that are, for the most part, already underway. What does that do to our reserve? So this is what our reserve looks like over the 10-year period. Assuming about an 85% spend rate on capital, we're forecasting we'll be at about 77% at end of year this year, between 75 and 77. So if we continue a rate of inflation increase year over year, by 2027 we'll have roughly $65 million in the reserve. But recognize in the longer term, beyond that 10-year forecast, as I said, we've got about $450 million in capital that will have to be spent. This reserve will not necessarily be sufficient to do that. So again, lots of unknowns at this point that we're talking beyond 10 years out as to how we move forward with this. But I will say that there are a number of, we're not bringing forward a multi-year plan like we did last year. And the reason that we're not bringing forward a multi-year plan is there's a lot of unknowns and variables in the solid waste industry right now that could impact what our financials will look like over the next 10 years. So to give you an example of a few, we've got our contamination program. If we can get our contamination in check, that could very well reduce our operating pressures by several $1 million a year. We've got the new legislation for blue box recycling, which basically says right now we're supposed to get roughly 50% of the cost from stewards, from the Walmarts, Procter & Gamble's, Unilevers of the world. We end up getting about 43% of that cost year over year. The new legislation will fund 100% of that program. How that's all going to work, we don't know yet. This is all in discussion with the province and all of their parties, but it could be a significant cost reduction to the city year over year. The other thing, two other things, we've got our renewable natural gas projects that once they come online, that will be a net positive revenue stream to the city that will be able to help offset future rate increases. And then we've also got development charges. Under the amendments to the development charges, solid waste is now eligible for the first time to apply development charges to growth-related projects in the city. That's never been allowed before under the legislation. So we are still working through what that would look like. We don't have enough information right now through that process because it is brand new to bring it forward in the 18 budget, but it's certainly something that we can look forward to bringing into the 19 project. So there's four major changes that are happening in the industry right now, all in a state of flux. We will know more within the next 6 to 8 months. So what we decided was we would bring forward a budget for the 18 year. This is the budget for the 18 year. And then once we know, have a much better line of sight on all those other variables and unknowns, that's when we can come forward with a future rate program for the next few years, similar to what Toronto Water has. And with that, Mr. Chair, that's the presentation.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. We will begin with Councillor Carroll, then Campbell.
Okay, thank you. If we go back to, quickly, just back to page 6, this is just something I heard at the Zero Waste Conference this week. You noted that you're researching what to do about improving the textile diversion, as that's the next most present thing in the stream. But there was discussion at the conference this week, the annual general meeting for the National Zero Waste Conference, that textile diversion, which is, i.e. shipping to Africa and shipping to China, that increasingly these places are saying, we won't take it. So it's not so much a matter of diverting it to where, but diverting it to what. So what does your research entail? Is it looking at breaking down the textiles? Would that be done domestically in North America, or what's the plan?
Right, so we're looking at all those different options right now. There was just a recent announcement as much as last week made about a number of East African countries, which is the primary source or destination for a lot of used textiles in North America right now. They're now indicating that they're cutting off that supply of material to build up their own economies to manufacture their own. It was going largely to those countries for reuse. Which means, you know, again, we're subject to fluctuations in markets and commodities. That's another commodity. So our textile research is looking at, you know, when a place collects textiles, some of it goes into a value village. The higher quality material will go for reuse locally. Lower quality materials may go somewhere else. Some of it may get shredded and used in different industrial processes as shredded textiles. So there's all these different options. So we're looking at what are all those different options. But we're also looking at, you know, what we don't want to end up is this material eventually being shipped to a foreign country and then it's getting landfilled or it's getting burned or it's not being managed in an environmentally manner that we would find acceptable.
Right, right. So if those things start to change on sort of the global scale, the other one they were talking about was getting to the point where when we are sending things, when we are marketing things out, 16% of the revenue has to do with the sale of recyclables and other revenue sources, and another 6% in extended producer responsibility. And there's another conversation, Pack Next and people like that, where organizations like that were there and talking about, we don't want to just keep paying stewardship funding. If you're telling us what we have to do is stop creating colored bottles, like an orange bottle to represent Gatorade, we'd rather spend the money on changing our product to what you want and give you less money. But a fair chunk of our budget is counting on that EPR money coming to us. Are you forecasting and allowing for that? If those changes came, our financial model would continue to work? Those types of changes you're referring to, our financial model would actually improve overall. So if you take our entire recycling program, very, very rough numbers, roughly $60 million of total cost. Yeah.
Roughly $20 million of that we recover through the sale of recyclable material.
Right.
Which leaves us with 40. Roughly 20 of that we get through stewardship funding, and the other 20 is a net cost to the city. Under this new program, under the new legislation, that 20 million of net cost would be paid for by the stewards as well. So that basically frees up $20 million of operating cost year over year in the solid waste budget. But again, this is all dependent on how that transition happens, what the terms of agreement are.
Yeah.
There's a lot of unknowns as to exactly how that would work.
But that model, they're actually advocating they don't like the model and are proposing a better way. So that would be a longer term issue. And the last thing was, and thank you for doing this, I remember we asked if we're losing multi-res customers, where are they going and what happens to their diversion, and you've researched it. You say you've been tracking them. And some of them are picking up private collectors and you're finding out they're not doing any diversion at all. In some cases, they're down to one stream. Are we doing any kind of research or consultant work that looks at getting to the point where we have the ability to legislate, or at least ask the other orders of government to legislate, so that whether you go private or go with us, you have to do 3 streams?
Yes, we are. We've actually done a lot of that work already, and we've even reached out to the business community to have an initial round of consultation on that to get their perspective. We are doing it, but the province is also doing it in parallel. Right now, the province is responsible for those activities and the enforcement.
Okay.
They are reviewing their legislation as well, so we're trying to work in parallel so that we don't preempt them and voluntarily accept a download for, you know, this program and all the enforcement that would go along with it, but at the same time to make sure that it meets what we're going to be looking for as well.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Councillor Campbell, you're next.
Thank you. So why would a building opt for a paid pickup rather than free pickup in a multi-res?
Well, because, Counselor, they pay for our service as well.
Oh, they do?
They do, yes.
Oh, okay, all
Yeah,
right.
they pay a fee for our service.
Okay, so are our fees too high?
Well, that's part of a review that we're looking at right now, is how do our fees compare for the level of service that we're providing? But to remember, we're providing garbage, recycling, and organics as part of our fee. If you move down to simply a garbage collection or just a garbage and recycling collection, the fees will be less.
Right, okay. Is there any consideration or discussion in the division about having centralized depots where people could do drop-off of recycled, such as they do in Europe?
Yes, that's actually one of the recommendations that came through the long-term strategy, centralized depots that people could come to, but also mobile depots for large multi-res complexes that we could actually bring a depot to the complex. Again, it's in the strategy. It's pushed out into another couple of years because we don't want to necessarily develop a system to manage some of these products that the stewards will take over or be responsible for and then not be willing to fund. So a lot of it is dependent over the next 6 to 8 months on what happens with this legislation.
So is it possible, you know, at least in the suburbs, there are plazas with large surface parking lots. Is it possible we could one day see, you know, cone-like things that where people can drop off their papers and their plastics and their cans and bottles and things like that?
It is absolutely possible, whether we do it or Procter & Gamble does it. Absolutely, it could be like that.
All right. Now, do you know, is there any way to measure the bin capacity on pickup day? In other words, the total capacity of all of the bins that are accepting recycled goods from households across Toronto on any given day?
So
Because we know the type of bin that people have, but do we know the capacity of the bins when they're being picked up, when the stuff is being picked up?
We, through you, Mr. Chair, we do not actively track how much material is in that bin. We know exactly the size of the bin and how frequently it's collected, but we don't know exactly the capacity within the bin.
So you don't have any way of getting a total of the tons collected over a cycle?
Oh, yes, we know that information. We track that information on a daily basis. What I'm referring to is when we collect that blue bin, is it a quarter full? Is it 3/4 full? We don't have that.
So over the course of a cycle, which is a 2-week cycle of pickup, you know the total number, the capacity of the bins, and then you do know the total capacity or the total tons that are picked up. I mean, it could be, so you would know if maybe the bins were at 80% or 75% if you did that calculation, would you not?
No, because there's all different sizes of bins out there. So some of the larger bins might be full, some of the smaller bins might not have as much.
I mean,
in them.
I'm thinking on a citywide basis. So you
we could probably run that number, but to be honest, I don't know how much value it would probably
Okay, so, well, the reason for the question is, what if every 2 weeks the bins are full, and how would you determine whether or not the pickup of recycled goods needs to be more frequent than every 2 weeks?
In those types of situations, and we do have some customers or residents that have more than one bin, and we basically deal with it on an individual by individual basis. If they're producing more than what one bin will sustain, we give them a second bin.
So then you don't foresee more frequent service than once every 2 weeks on recycled goods? Okay.
No.
The debt, you said the debt's $276.8 million. What is the plan to retire that debt? How is that rising? Is it falling? What is happening with that?
So I'll start the answer. Revenue Services is responsible for overseeing the sort of total debt load. Certainly, I would like to bring forward a plan that ultimately phases out that debt to the extent possible.
It's a cost to carry it, of course, right? Okay.
Yeah.
I can get that later, or?
So through you, Mr. Chair, this program is intended to be much like Toronto Water, where it is not running on debt, but on a full user fee basis. So this is part of the ongoing phase out and movement into the utility rate kind of model. So what we're doing right now is understanding what's that balance in capital that's required and fronting that debt, and they're repaying through their fees. Eventually, the rate is supposed to take over that full.
One last question. What are the legislated capital expenditures?
That would be things like landfill site monitoring of air around a landfill site, groundwater around a landfill site, those types of things.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Burnside next.
Thank you. Through you, so if you're looking at garbage pickup, just garbage specifically, no, specifically garbage, not recycling, thanks, Joe. If you broke it down into two components, you actually have the garbage you're picking up, and you have the cost of actually going there, right? And the cost of going to each house, I'm talking about residential, is obviously the same irrespective of the size of the bin. What is the cost of going to each household?
That's an answer I don't have in front of me, Counselor, but we can certainly break that down for you.
Okay, thanks. So if you just want to look at the total cost, so those small bins, what's the, I believe was it $28 a year or something?
Yes.
For a small bin? What's the actual cost on average?
So if I can draw your attention to slide 18, top row, going left to right. So that's a small bin. The 2017 gross cost is $249.67. The resident in 2017 dollars is paying through the rate program $22.66. And then the rest of that cost is covered through the tax program through an internal transfer from the tax program into the rate program.
Thanks. And I understand there was some plan to actually take it right off the tax base. How many more years is left in that?
So that's part of the annual discussion on phasing out of the rebate, which is part of the tax base discussion. Last year, we did phase it out again, and that has happened over the last couple of years. We'll have to bring forward a plan, whatever that may look like, as part of the tax budget program.
Okay. So in terms of people that are putting garbage into recycling, how do you handle that?
So right now, we're doing a number of different things depending on the customer. For multi-residential customers, we have a team now that actively goes out in front of the collection vehicles.
Sorry, just residential, because the multi-res is a whole other issue, if you don't mind, just for my...
Yeah, for single family right now, what we're doing is we've got teams of staff going out and reviewing each bin. They're lifting the lids and identifying if they find contaminated material in there. They will tag that bin. If they go back out a second time, they will push that bin back, and we refuse to collect it until they clean it up. That's lifting lids, and we're finding about 5% of the bins lifting lids. We're now going on a second route where we actually identify, we'll put a rear packer on the route so that we can actually dump that bin to see the full contents of the bin. And we're finding 15 to 20% of residents are actually putting stuff into the recycling that they shouldn't be. And same thing. So the next time we'll flag that household, we'll push it back, and we'll refuse to collect until they clean it up.
Okay, so how many, I'll call them, I guess, inspectors for want of a better term. How many inspectors do you have citywide doing that?
Do you know, about 10, 8 to 10, and those are staff, junior level staff that we've pulled off of other things to be able to do that right now.
So not a whole lot. And then, so they go and they'll, these 5 or 15%, whatever the number is, they put a tag on it, and then I guess they presumably go back the next week to check again, or 2 weeks later.
That's correct.
And then the person hasn't gotten the message, can't read, maybe, I don't know. And then at that point, they push it back. And then at what point do they actually get charged?
We haven't implemented a process yet for charging. We've certainly started threatening that eventually we may have to get to that point if the behavior doesn't improve, but we haven't started that process yet.
So you think you can change behavior without charging?
I remain hopeful, Councillor, that we will be able to implement behavior change. Yes.
100% of that 15%?
No.
What percentage?
But I believe we can get it down to a much lower percentage doing what we're doing right now, and then I think eventually we will get into a situation where we've got to start charging individuals for doing it.
Okay. And then lastly, so what happens with the contaminated recyclables?
So all the recyclables that we collect flows through our transfer stations into our recycling facility. It's basically a reverse assembly line where you're dismantling everything, and they will pull out all that garbage material, and it will eventually get sent to landfill.
Sorry, mechanically or just people?
Both, mechanically and people, and they will pull out all the garbage. They will also pull out all the recycling that has been contaminated by the garbage. So all that high-quality paper fiber that's been contaminated, that contaminated fiber has to get pulled out and sent to landfill as well.
Okay, so what's the cost of that, including the opportunity cost?
So we're saying right now, for every percentage point we could bring it down, we would reduce our operating cost by $600,000 a year.
So you're talking $9 million is the annual cost, is your estimate?
Roughly, yeah, that's a fairly close
Okay,
number.
thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Nunziata.
Just to touch on Councillor Burnside question as well. So we did a walkabout this morning, right? Thank you. So we did notice when we did the walkabout, there were a number of garbage bags that they had rental material in it that was just sitting there, and then also recycling bins which had garbage, right?
That's
We
correct.
noticed that. So my question goes back to what Councillor Burnside, as far as the enforcement. So when it's not picked up and it's left, is that reported, does somebody report it to you or to the staff and say this material is here and that you need to go and charge them or enforce the bylaw? Like, how does it get reported? This morning it got reported because I was with you, but how does it get reported any other time?
So,
Because they do this all the time, right?
right, through you, Mr. Chair, we saw two things this morning. We
Yeah.
saw blue bins that were full of garbage, which would follow our process where we push them back and not collect them. We also saw just bags of garbage put out on the street with no tags on them. Bags of garbage put out on the street with no tags on them, we immediately call that address into our colleagues over at MLS, and they'll send a bylaw officer out there, issue a notice of violation, and then eventually we'll be able to fine them for that sort of thing, because that is, in fact, against our bylaw. Those types of situations, my guys out on the street, when they see that, they will radio in the address so that we're, to the extent that we can, actively trying to.
Okay, but if it's not your guys on the street and it's the garbage, the trucks that go by and pick up the garbage, recycling, do they not report it, can't they report it to you?
They do, yeah, those are my guys, either.
Oh, I thought you meant you have
staff
special
or
guys, you have
contractors.
special guys that go out there, the 8 people that go out and enforce.
We do that. We
Okay.
will go in and blitz an area, but when we have a collection truck going by, the driver is also capable of just radioing that address.
So they do that?
Problem here. Yes, they do. Yeah,
They're supposed to.
they're supposed to.
So obviously they didn't do it where we were this morning.
Well, that site was actually collected last night, so we haven't checked the logs yet to see if it was radioed in last night.
Okay, because that really is an issue, and thank you very much for doing that walkabout with me.
No problem.
So just another question. Last year, we did approve, I'm sure we did the $8 fee on bulk items, residential, but we implemented that, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so what was the total, how successful is that, and how much did we collect, and where did that money go?
The program has been very successful. We have collected. It's part of the quarterly utility bill that all customers get, or monthly utility bill they get. And that money is being put towards that process of collecting all that bulk material. So that program has been implemented and has been very successful.
And so is it covering the cost of our cost?
It's-
$8, or
it's
do you
very
need to
close.
increase it more?
No, it's fine, and I believe we're not actually increasing that cost at all this year. We're keeping it flat at the $8. It's been successful, but again, the cost to manage that program is dependent on how much material at the end of the year gets put out. So we're doing very well on that project right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
I just,
Oh, sorry. Councillor Mahavik, did you have, I thought we already. Yeah, no, sorry. Okay, Councillor Davis, Councillor Mahavik first. And again, I'm trying to get this done in about 15 minutes so we can give Toronto Parking Authority the last half hour.
Sure, okay. What was the quantum that we received from the city side in 2017 and 2016 to help this budget out, on the rebate side?
On the rebate side, I don't have, yeah, about 140, it's in the slide here, just let me find it.
140,
To be clear, Councillor, through you, Mr. Chair, we don't give the program the funding. It's actually a direct rebate to the household.
sure, okay, yeah, thank you for the clarity of language, but what was the amount?
144 million.
44? And you're doing this budget today, what were you assuming it would be for 2018? You made an assumption.
In all of our projections right now, we've assumed no change to the rebate for 2018. But again, that's to be decided through the tax base budget.
Oh, I see. Okay, so, but your budget goes first, that budget goes second. So how does that work?
Any decisions in the tax-based budget would be in addition to whatever has been approved in the rate budget.
So does that go into reserve and is used later? Like, let's say we decide that we're only going to transfer over, I don't know, 125, so there's $19 million unaccounted for.
Well, it's extremely complicated. It's probably a half-hour discussion on just how the rebate works, and I would get actually the Executive Director of Financial Planning to have that discussion. But changing the rebate doesn't actually impact the solid waste budget financials in any way.
Oh, I see. It just means they'll get residents will get a higher bill thereafter. Okay.
That's right.
Okay. So multi-res recycling, just to clarify that, do we have the whole city multi-res that are our customers, not private customers, on diversion?
Yes.
Green bin and blue bin.
That is a condition of our service, and we manage about 2/3 of the multi-residential buildings in the city.
Okay, so we were phasing it in, I'm sure I lost track, but everything is in now.
Everything, all the organics programs are into all the buildings that we service, yes.
And at the end of the day, the net result is 2/3 have gone with us, 1/3 have gone with the private sector.
I would have to check the historicals, but that 1/3, 2/3 relationship was in place long before we rolled out those programs.
Oh, I see, but now, because it's all rolled out, some private multi-res property owners don't want to go with us. Why is that? Is it a cost thing or is it a service thing?
So we do feedback interviews. If we lose a customer, we'll go out and talk to them, and we get feedback. Sometimes it's a service complaint that they will leave. In other cases, it's we've been too aggressive with our requirements for diversion, and it's just easier to throw it into a garbage bin or into a recycling bin and get rid of it and not have an organics program, so they leave our system. There's a number of different complaints that we get.
From an environmental perspective, are we kind of looking at a bylaw that would say you can go private, you can go public, but you got to divert?
That's what we're looking at.
Great. And lastly, like I'm actually hearing quite a lot. I'm not sure if I should address you or to Human Resources, but I am hearing a lot of that we just don't have the person power, a lot of retirements coming up. Is this something that you're working with the George Brown Colleges of the world and so on, or is that something that we should do on a citywide basis, given that same thing is happening in many a department?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can't comment on all the other departments, but I would say both. We are actively working now and reaching out to universities to try and attract new talent. We do bring on co-op placements. We bring on Toronto Urban Fellows all the time. So we've had some really good success with bringing students into the division and trying to basically, because we have so much trouble recruiting already experienced people, bring them in young and train them to be able to be the people that we need.
Okay, thank you. I'm good.
Thank you, Councilor DiCiano.
Yeah, just one quick question. On the, to Councilor Mahevik's points, on the multi-res, how many of these units or these buildings are leaving to go to the private sector and not diverting? Is it a very troubling trend, or is it like a minority?
It's not a troubling trend yet. It's a few hundred. Yeah, few hundred a year. It's not a troubling trend yet.
A few hundred a year are leaving and then doing the private thing?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow, okay.
It's not troubling yet, but it's getting to the point that we think something needs to be done about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Now, Councilor Davis.
Thank you. I noticed the commercial DACs, which I gather is a new way to call ABCs, schools and tipping are 5.2%. So are we going to charge our own ABCs 5.2%, which means we're just going to have to, they're going to have to pay somewhere else? And then the commercial, does that affect, what I have heard from our BIAs is that they've been told that their charges are going up significantly for next year. And at a most recent BIA meeting, they're talking about all pulling out and going to private. So is it 5.2% for our small businesses on our commercial strips?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that's correct.
And why did we choose to increase them at 5.2, multi-res at 1, single family at 2? Why did we
We,
decide to
through
do?
you, Mr. Chair, we have a complex model that that allocates all of our specific costs to the different types of customers that we service. And this is a customer that has been getting relatively cheap service for a number of years. So that's why over the last year it was this way, and again this year we've had to increase theirs more than some others to make sure that they are actually paying the cost of the services that they're
Would
getting.
it be possible to see some of the work on that? Because I really don't understand this. The other is, I mean, we're going to pay on the other end at the city somehow if we're increasing for TTC, all of our agencies, boards, and commissions. But why multi-res is 1%, I don't know. But I'd really like to understand how this really affects the small businesses that are on our business streets, and whether or not there's a way to, and schools, the school boards. I mean, I don't know how the school boards are going to pay the additional costs. Anyway, we're going to hear about it, and
Through
have
you,
we,
Mr. Chair, we can bring more back.
have we informed the school boards?
So through the chair, the rates were actually posted today on the city's website, and I have had communications with school boards for many years on our rate increases.
Okay, so we will hear about it for sure, that they have not prepared for it, have no budget for it. At another 5.2%, I really think this rate needs to be examined on the schools, our small commercial entities, but I'll put that aside. I wanted to ask you, on the issue of the enforcement and the enforcement of those that are not of contamination. I hear what you're doing. This is on failure to abide by both the provincial legislation to recycle on the C&I sector. And we asked for changes under the City of Toronto Act to give us the authority that would allow us to proceed with developing an enforcement strategy. Could you please tell me more about what you said with the provincial and city government? Because we've got direction to do that. You have direction to do that. And I'm wondering, are you going to report out on this in more detail? Because I think everyone is quite interested in understanding the authority we have to enforce versus what the provincial government is doing.
Right, through you, Mr. Chair, yes, you're absolutely right. Right now, the province is responsible for this legislation and enforcement. They are reviewing that as we speak. Through amendments to the City of Toronto Act, we were successful in getting that amendment that we also now have these powers to be able to do so.
Yes.
So we're working on a document right now that will report back. Our target is February Public Works Committee to bring that.
Great, thank you very much, that's very helpful. The third thing I wondered about was the $450 million capital at the end of the 10 years. Does that include the residual care reserve liability? Or is that just capital? Perpetual care?
No, that's just the sum of 3 large projects that will be, that's not our regular sort of capital that we have year over year. Those
Okay.
are 3 large projects.
And what is the perpetual care reserve liability? Is that anywhere in here?
It's not in the presentation, Councillor. It's in the report that you'll be getting momentarily, I believe, in the budget report. Our outstanding liability right now is I believe, $128 million on our closed landfill site.
128 million?
Yes.
Okay. And one last question, if I could. The contracted services, you've put in the inflation on page 11, and it looked like there was quite significant inflation on the contracts.
That's your last question,
Is
Councillor.
this the collection, so where it has collection contracts, price escalations, are those the contracted out collection costs in districts 1 and 2?
Districts 1 and 2 are multi-residential and also some of the litter.
Thank you, Councillor. That's your last question. Councillor DeBaremaker, then Fletcher. Again, folks, we have like a half hour. We're really trying to, I want to give Toronto Parking Authority the bill. You have every opportunity to ask questions next week. This is not your last chance to ask questions. We do have to respect the Toronto Parking Authority. Have been here for a couple of hours. We have to give them their fair time.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. In the licensing department, some of our inspectors, like the Rent Safe program, are allocated on a cost recovery basis. If we have 10 inspectors searching through blue bins, should we not go to a cost recovery basis?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that's the next step of the program that we are looking at, is how we would actually implement that. And part of it is, do we have to go to full bylaw inspectors, or could we do it as a cost recovery program using staff, which would be a lower cost operating option with still the same effect?
Okay, and I would imagine, like we do in our apartment buildings, if one of my kids throws their pair of running shoes in my blue bin, and your inspector comes, I'd still be at maybe 95 or 99% pure recycling material. So you probably wouldn't, I'm assuming, charge people the first time. You don't charge anybody now. But I'm assuming on a cost recovery basis, you'd have somebody, like many people, your first time is a grace period. Oops, your kids threw running shoes in the green bin. Please don't do it again. Oh, there's some lasagna in here. It's disgusting. Shouldn't be in here. Don't do it again. But if we come back, then we charge you.
Yeah, so the plan that we're moving forward with right now is, oops, don't do it again is the first one. The second one is, you did it again, we're not going to collect it, we need you to clean it up. And the third one is, we're now going to issue a charge.
Okay, if we could maybe talk offline about maybe trying to accelerate that program for consideration in the 2018 budget, that would be great. Now, I think you said, is it the average contaminants in a blue bin is about 27%?
26%.
26. So my blue bin, and I don't want to challenge you so that you'll go to my house, but my guess is my blue bin is probably 98% pure, if not higher. My partner and I have philosophical discussions about what to do with a string. And we go to the waste wizard. So if my bin is at 95% pure, that means my neighbors might not be at 26% contaminants, but at 50% contaminants.
That's correct.
There'll be some bad apples or some non-caring citizens that are putting everything in their recycling bin.
That's correct.
So having inspectors to catch the bad people, so that we good people aren't paying for their bad habits, is a good thing.
That's our philosophy as well, Councillor.
Now, you said about 1/3 of the buildings, the high-rises, have gone out, opted out, I'll call it, of our system. To me, that's about 1,500 apartment buildings. We've got about 5,000 buildings. I'm seeing somebody shake their head. We have about 5,000 buildings in the city of Toronto, roughly?
Roughly,
yeah.
Yes.
And we've got, then that means about 1,500 property owners' buildings have opted out of our system so far.
That's, so they may never have been on our system. So to be clear,
Right.
you know,
They've
100,
always
200.
been scoundrels.
Well, no, I wouldn't necessarily.
They've always avoided us because they don't want to recycle.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and we found this out through the Mayor's Towering Challenge. We had a number of buildings apply to be a part of that challenge who were not on our service, who are some of the best diverters in the city on a private service. So I wouldn't necessarily characterize it that way.
Not all of them. You found a couple of good apples.
We found like our system that we service, there's good apples and there's bad apples.
Okay, and our Toronto community housing projects, sorry, if you can remind me, are we charging them yet?
Yes, they pay a fee just like everyone else does.
Sorry, I can't.
Through you, Mr. Chair, they pay a fee just like everyone else does.
Okay, and that's based on, and they have to provide the green bin service?
Yes, they do.
So then we've given them, I'll call it an extra helping hand to make sure that with the challenges they face, the residents now are being told to use the green bin, blue bin, and recycling bin.
We have actually seconded a solid waste staff into Toronto Community Housing to help them with exactly that, yes.
They're not doing it in my ward.
Well, we have one staff helping out, and I think there's roughly 400 buildings.
Okay, and through you, Mr. Chair, in terms of our biogas, will we be producing biogas in 2018?
If everything goes well, Mr. Chair, by the end of 2018, we should be putting biogas into the pipeline, but it would likely be the second or third week of December if it happens. So that's why we haven't incorporated it in this budget.
So that means all of that smelly stuff we put in our green bin, what percentage of that will be treated and we'll be getting gas from?
All of the, so biogas from our anaerobic digestion facilities, all of it is treated right now so that we don't end up with odor issues, but the gas is actually flared, it's burned.
Yeah.
The material going to the flare right now will be redirected to a station that will clean that gas and re-inject it back into the pipeline, and then we can pull an equivalent amount off at our collection yards to fuel our CNG trucks to go out and collect more organic material to create more fuel to fuel our trucks, and it's circular.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you very much. Where is going to be the first opportunity to have a status report to committee and council on the program for Toronto community housing buildings and their diversion for 400 buildings?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we don't track Toronto community housing specifically separate from all of our other multi-residential customers. We don't have a plan in place right now to report back on that item specifically.
But because you have a staff seconded, and there are 400 buildings, and they haven't been doing that, would that make sense then to have that reported somewhere? Would you be able to report on that somehow, since you have a staff person there?
Yeah, the staff person that we have there is largely troubleshooting and helping wherever possible. Could we prepare a report to document waste diversion in Toronto community housing? Yeah, we could probably prepare something like that if there was a
I guess I'm
request.
going to ask, are they measuring it?
To some extent or another, yes. We know, for instance, all of the bins that we collect from Toronto Community Housing have RFID tags on them now, so we know how much is being collected from all these buildings.
So
We just haven't packaged it up into a report.
Right, so you could establish a baseline, or somebody, who would establish that baseline?
That would be
Them
us.
Or you? Pardon?
That would be us. We would do.
You would establish the baseline, and then we would see how that's going. Is that possible to do that?
That is possible.
I think Councillor Nunziata would be happy to know that was happening as well. And then on the contamination project, I guess as well, because these are all matrix, you're measuring things now, how things are going. So where are the two areas, or where's the area that you're piloting your stamp out contamination project?
All over the city right now.
So all over the city? And so in pockets, or just absolutely everywhere?
Everywhere. We are for single family, it's everywhere. We're going out into different pockets. For multi-residential, we've been doing it for about a year now.
I'm just
And we
gonna
know
talk
where the
about-
bad buildings are, so we're starting a more of a targeted campaign.
I'm just going to talk about single family. So how are you tracking the pockets or the single family?
The
Success or not success?
staff out on the street are keeping all those logs, and we're starting to develop a database.
So on the street. So when you're in the contracted out areas, what's required of them?
There's
Districts
no,
1 and 2.
from a contamination perspective, there's no difference. These are all city staff that are going out across the entire city, whether it's a contracted area or a public collected area.
But you did mention that when they're driving by or they're seeing, they're phoning it in. I understood that the waste collectors are phoning it in.
If they
You're
see,
asking
if
them
they
to phone
see
that in.
something, yes, yeah.
So what's the protocol or requirement in districts 1 and 2 for a phone-in, and who are they calling?
They radio into the supervisor, and it gets logged with city staff.
And can you track how many calls are coming in from any district? Obviously, you measure by district, so on this project also, you'd be measuring by district. Would I be right or wrong?
On this project, we're measuring basically city overall. Could we break it down by district? Probably. I don't believe we've been doing that yet.
So you could break it down by district, how many calls you're getting that are logged from the street, and what the engagement is really from your full complement of solid waste staff.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I'd have to review that with 311 because some of the calls go through them as well, but we could probably figure that out.
Who would be calling 311?
Our guys would go through the supervisor staff, through contracted services, and then ultimately through city staff. But there are other calls that come in as well about, an illegal set out or illegal dumping, which all goes through 311 as well. And when our staff are out on the street, they're looking for contamination, but they may be finding other things.
But the contracted services that we have and the city staff are not calling 311. They're calling
No, they won't be calling
designated
311.
number.
They won't.
So
be
you
calling.
can measure that performance across each district and see what's happening
We
there.
should be able to.
You
Yes.
should be able to measure the contamination across all 4 districts and see what's happening.
That's correct.
And create a baseline. And when and how are you creating your baseline for this contamination across the districts?
Well, we're collecting that information every day right now as we're out in the street doing.
Well, where is the baseline? Where are you going to have your baseline? Have you established it already?
No,
Or are you going to establish it shortly?
Through you, Mr. Chair, some of these actions we've only started as recently as the last few weeks. So we are just building that baseline now. We want to work through the entire city once to build the baseline, and then we need to go back out and visit all those properties a second time to see if we've had a change in behavior, and then go back out a third time. So We want to get through the entire city once to establish the foundation and the baseline, and then we'll start monitoring performance of this initiative against the baseline.
But I guess I didn't hear you say that. I'm not trying to be difficult, but if you go to someone's house and they've had a problem, you're going to go back to
Thank you,
that
Councillor.
house. You're
Councillor,
not
thank you
going
very much.
somewhere
That's
else.
your time. Thank you. It's
We can talk after.
Maybe we can
Thank
get a
you.
briefing note on that. It'd be very helpful.
That's all the questions. Thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you.
We have we got about 25 minutes left. Toronto Parking Authority are coming up to do their deck. It's a 50-page deck. My recommendations to the committee is that we allow them to present, but we won't be able to ask questions until the next meeting. It's just we went far too long today on questions, so
yes, I do.
they have every opportunity to present to us as the other divisions did. So my suggestion is if we allow them to at least present till 4 o'clock, and then next week we'll have an opportunity for questions. But again, and if possible, if we can whip through your deck as expediently as possible, that would be great, because we need to be done by 4.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. We have no intention of going through the 50 slides in detail. We'll hit the highlights.
Thank you.
So, just to introduce ourselves, I'm Andy Koropesky, the temporary lead at Parking Authority, and Robin Oliphant, our Vice President of Finance and Administration, will be running through our deck.
Can I just have a bit of quiet, please? I know we're sort of getting close to the end of the afternoon, but if we can just pay attention just for this last 20 minutes, it'd be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Budget Committee. I'll quickly roll through these slides for you. Our key highlights for the 2018 budget include a $72 million distribution estimated for 2017 and a further $81 million in 2018. In terms of how our Green P dollar is spent, for 2018, we are forecasting 50 cents on the dollar, being a return of operating profit to the city of 36 cents and municipal taxes of 14 cents. 2017 will be comparable at approximately 49 cents. In terms of parking operation performance for the 2017 forecast, we are expecting to come in on budget. We have had some early car park closures in our off-street facilities, which is adversely affecting our revenues. However, the success of the Green P app is offsetting that. In terms of operating expenses, we have some reductions in material supplies and timing differences in the rollout of the Green P mobile app, which is allowing us to come in on budget. For the Toronto Bike Share, we're estimating an operating deficit of $690,000. This is primarily because of the timing of receipt of sponsorship funds for 2017. Currently, negotiations are in progress, and we're expecting to bridge that shortfall in 2017 and into 2018. We are estimating a subsidy per ride of about 45 cents, or 18% of the operating budget, which is favorably comparable to other city programs. The 2018 budget for the parking operations, we're expecting actually a $3.5 million increase year over year, or 5.6%. This is really driven from our comprehensive rate review that was recently conducted, and is strongly driven from our on-street operations. And quickly to bike share, the 2018 budget, we're forecasting a deficit of $410,000, or 16% subsidy per ride, which is a reduction down to 8% of the operating budget. The revenue next year for bike share is expected to grow from the expansion of the bike share network. The adoption in 2017 has been quite strong, and we're expecting that to continue into 2018 with a 20% increase in ridership. All right, year over year, our base budget pressures, overall, on a combined basis, we're expecting increases of $3.1 million, or 4.9%. This is really largely driven from our revenue growth projections, of which on-street is looking at $6 million and approximately $2.8 million for off-street. We do have one adjustment in the detail here, where we have a restatement in our 2017 budget for our FTE complement, bringing it up to full staffing complement. Okay. 2017 capital highlights. We've completed a comprehensive review of our capital, and based upon our cash flow and projections, we're expecting to come in at about 86 million. 72 million of these projects or unspent balance has been either canceled or deferred. And in 2018, our focus on capital expenditures is in the state of good repair, as well as specified service improvement projects. And over the next 9 years, a lot of our projects are identified against service improvements, but they are provisional at this time and subject to change. We have identified areas in need or opportunities for improvement, and as time comes closer, we will have closer details on that, but at the time they're subject to change. In our 2018 capital plan by funding source, we do not initiate any projects unless we have fully funding opportunities, and in the case of our provisional projects, we look forward in the future to ensure that they are covered by either third-party or joint venture arrangements. Okay, and in summary on our capital, we have laid out here in the highlights the key projects for the 10-year program, which are valued over 10 million. Thank you.
Just a quick one. You were talking about not proceeding unless you have third-party partnerships and such. Is that why we see a lot of capital is being funded by air right sales and things like that? Is that because those are finished real estate transactions and you don't include, you know, those cases in later years just because you haven't done them yet? Is there more potential in those out years? Are there other areas where you have air rights potential?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to make sure of that.
Where we have specific plans and agreements in place, or are looking at due diligence, then we...
Oh, okay. And I only had one other question, and I was joking before. I just had one question. When are you closing the parking lot that I use whenever I go to get my hair done? However, I'm asking it because I see Bay and Lakeshore plus other lots, so I'm assuming it's in there. But I didn't know there was a plan to close the Bay Street Lakeshore parking lot. That's another big revenue earner. So it looks like the ones that you were closing are real bread and butter locations. Are those all happening in the same year, or that's throughout the plan?
The city didn't actually own the land at Bay and Lakeshore. We were there under an agreement with the owner until such time as the land was developed. So the timing of those
that development I
closures
see
is-
going on there now, you're
Correct.
not earning anything.
No, that was not owned by the city. So those closures, the timing of those are not necessarily within, and usually not within the ability of the parking authority to control.
Okay. And what about the one at Yorkville? Because that is a big revenue earner as well. So it isn't just for a personal reason that I asked.
Yes.
Do we get any benefit? Because that's quite a tall development. Is that one of yours?
The Cumberland Yorkville Garage, yes, again, the land, the development rights were sold a couple of years ago.
Right.
So we are continuing to operate on a lease arrangement at the moment. However, when that when that development is completed, one of the provisions is that they provide a fully turnkey operating garage back to us. That was one of the arrangements.
So what you will lose is more than offset. Plus, what you get back will be similarly a real high earning lot.
Yes, I mean, the number of spaces in that particular facility are not going to be what was lost. They won't entirely make it up. But for example, in that neighborhood, we've just completed an addition of 2 floors on the Hayden Church garage. So and we're also looking at various other initiatives, other possible partnerships in the Bloor-Yorkville neighborhood area, young Bloor-Yorkville area,
Okay.
trying to offset any losses.
Right, right. And is it safe to say, the revenue is up and you mentioned the app. Is it safe to say the projection that we had that if we went to app-based paying for the pay and display on the street, that we would see an uptake because people would refill the meter using the app? And so can you quantify that? What's been the benefit of doing the app?
Yes, the app has been a huge success, both anecdotally and by the numbers. Up to, we just launched it on the street last year about this time. In fact, last week was the first anniversary. And we're projecting by year end that app will have taken up to about 11 million transactions. So we're pacing well over 30% of the uncontrolled facilities. People are using the app as opposed to the equipment.
Excellent, excellent, thank you.
Questions? Other councillors? Mahavik, DiCiano? Okay, Councillor Davis.
I just wondered and I was just saying to Andy, it's great to see Andy here.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
It talks about modernizing surface lots, et cetera, with an eco-conscious philosophy. We called them green parking lot standards last time. Are you still greening parking lots according to the multi-year green?
Yes, yes, the budget contains funding to do that. I believe it's $1.8 million. So we're targeting between 5 and 6 parking lots a year as the refurbishment of the parking lot becomes necessary. So yes.
Great. The other thing I wondered about was the loss of on-street spaces with bike lanes and King Street, for instance. It says you're going to be seeking out more on-street parking. How will you be doing that?
This year, for example, we've been working very closely with transportation services. So there's a number of, excuse me, there's a number of on-street locations where the area has changed, or just historically it's been 1 hour free parking or no parking where we could implement parking. And this year we've been successful in generating about 500 new spaces, new paid spaces. And that process is continuing, so we're working our way through the city. It's kind of a fairly analytical, intensive process, but we are able to identify new locations where paid parking would be viable. And also, as far as King Street goes, there have been a couple of reports in front of Community Council and City Council already, but the plan is to try and offset, excuse me, on the flanking streets, so where there's opportunities to implement paid parking, which would be displaced from King Street, we'll try and take advantage. So the net impact of that, I'm sorry, the net impact of the loss of those spaces will be offset somewhat by getting new paid spaces on the side streets.
Okay, so will there be kind of a plan? We will know
Yes, actually,
how they're going to be installed, because there'll be some people who won't be happy about that.
well, thank you. There actually is a plan, and I believe it's coming to Community Council if it hasn't been here already.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
All community councils?
The King Street in particular, or the overall?
No, the overall
Oh, no,
strategy.
so-
How many are you targeting? You said you did 500 more.
We're going ward by ward. So as we work through the city, the councillors of the wards are being consulted, and we're working with the councillors as well as transportation to identify these areas.
And how are you going ward by ward? I'm curious.
Well, like I say, and Councillor, as you know, parking can be contentious when it comes to people's local streets.
Yes.
So we have to make sure that we're doing consultation to ensure that people are aware of the pending plans.
No, I'm just
And
saying, are you doing it evenly across the city? In other words, not just starting downtown and then fanning out. I presume you're starting everywhere.
yes, I mean, in some wards, some areas of the city, just by the composition of the areas, paid parking won't be viable. But yes, we're
We
looking at.
already contribute a ton of money with parking, through parking permits in Toronto.
Yes.
And finally, the point you made that there are only going to be joint, any new capital outlays are only going to be with joint projects? And if so, we're doing an avenue study on the Danforth, so I'll be specific to my ward and actually 3 other councillors' wards. And they're doing a parking demand study. I don't even know if TPA is involved. I trust they are. But there's a third-party study being done. And when it identifies that, because we're having also pressure for bike lanes on the Danforth, and I assume what's going to happen is we will lose on-street parking. And because of development in very large sites that are going to happen in the old grocery store sites, Shoppers World, these places that are going to be developed, there's a ton of parking in those places. Are we going to be able to look at off-street parking areas that are strictly TPA parking lots?
Yes, I think to be clear about how the capital is funded, the TPA from the net revenues retains 15%, so that is intended to fund the capital projects that we are trying to deliver in terms of replacing parking. But there's other elements, and what we're trying to convey with this presentation is that a lot of our capital budget, for example, I wouldn't say speculative, but we're using the word provisional, may not be the correct word, but there are various projects, and Councillor Carroll's question kind of alluded to this, that we know we've sold the land. So the Yorkville-Cumberland Garage is a good example. And as part of that arrangement, the capital to pay for the garage that we're getting, the 800-space garage, was part of that arrangement. So we're not paying any so-called retained earnings. However, on probably the bulk of the capital, these are future projects that could go down in that manner. But the types of smaller lots in the areas
Yes.
that we're talking about, that would be funded from the retained earnings. And those are kind of the most.
How far out are those projects planned?
Yes, Councillor Davis, why don't you take that offline, because you're well past your time. I just stopped the clock. Okay, thank you very much for the presentation and the answers to the questions. We just need a motion for procedural purposes to keep the staff happy, that the item be received for information. Councillor Nunziatis, all moved? All in favor? That was it.